Chapter 234. Seneca's latest order was for Faust and Samir to quietly move to the city of Enril in the plains of Duk, while he himself remained in the occupied city-states of the Kingdom of Babylon, now the newest territory of the Kingdom of Assur, to enjoy the achievements and pleasure of a conqueror. At this time, the Kingdom of Babylon had already surrendered to Sinek, and the fighting in its territory had subsided. The second phase of the war between the kingdoms was almost over. The biggest loser of this war was, of course, the Kingdom of Babylon, but the biggest winner was a god, Enril. The main god of Assur and Hittite was Enril, and they opened up new territories, built shrines there, and ruled in the name of the god. This also represented the expansion of the power of the priests and the shrines. The scope of Enril's divine realm was getting wider and wider, and Marduk was losing ground. This was not a direct confrontation between the two gods, but the result of a war between the mortals. In a sense, the Kingdom of Assur was the most important chess piece in Enril's hands. Seneca's ambitions and Faust's strategic planning were more or less guided by this god, and many of their ideas and wishes were even directly related to Enril's oracle. For example, when Sinek had just ascended the throne, Enril had sent down an oracle, saying that he would become the greatest king of the continent, and hinting at what he should do. When the fierce fighting in the Kingdom of Babylon gradually subsided, the war between the kingdoms entered the third phase. Seneca's ambitions were ignited, and his goal was set on the plains of Duk. He had already established the strategic base of Enril, and the next step was to break through the city of Leng and block the trade route to the charcoal marsh. Seneca's conservative plan was to divide the fertile land equally with the north and south of the Hittite kingdom, and the best plan was to completely occupy the entire plains of Duk. If this goal was achieved, the power of the Kingdom of Assur would reach its peak on the continent, and Sinek would become the greatest king in history. Sinek sent Faust and Samir quietly to the city of Enril, and in fact, he had also received a hint from Enril. This great god predicted the future of the plains of Duk based on the development of the battle and the comparison of the strengths of the various parties, and his own guidance became part of this prophecy. Aesop did not know at first that his opponent had changed. The one who held the military and political power in the city of Enril was no longer the warrior Felix, but the strategist Faust. In the beginning, Faust did not reveal his strategic intentions, nor did he show his face in public. Instead, he secretly increased the power of Enril city. On the surface, he even deliberately showed weakness in a few conflicts. Through the war against the Kingdom of Babylon, the Assyrian kingdom captured a large number of people as slaves, and Faust took the opportunity to solve the most troublesome logistical problem. He gave these slaves a path of survival, or rather, hope. As long as they were able to transport sufficient production and strategic resources across the Saya Plateau to Enlil City, they would become citizens of Enlil City. In the future, if they were able to render meritorious service on the battlefield, they would be granted a piece of land. The narrow path across the Saya Plateau was cold and steep, and the logistical losses in personnel and supplies were great, but with such a policy, the captured slaves were willing to risk their lives. The giant legion had been assembled, and an even larger reserve army had appeared in the city of Enril as civilians, hoarding supplies and forging weapons. The news of King Seneca's expedition to Babylon had reached the city of Enril, and many of the warriors who participated in the war had become the new nobles of the kingdom, owning large tracts of land and a large number of slaves. This also made the soldiers in Enril, who had not achieved any results so far, both envious and expectant. They were eager to break through the city of Leng and become the new nobles of the plains of Duk. The Kingdom of Babylon submitted to the Kingdom of Assur. Except for not building shrines for Enril in the cities of the kingdom, other aspects were very similar to the situation when the Hittite kingdom submitted to the empire of Igut, and Sinek called himself the great emperor of Assur. Aesop and the others had also noticed that something was wrong with the situation in Enril, but at this time, there was another more important matter that attracted everyone's attention, and that was the latest changes in the situation between the Assyrian Empire, the Kingdom of Babylon, and the Hittite kingdom. While Faust was secretly plotting in the city of Enril, the war in the Kingdom of Babylon had completely subsided. The great emperor of Assur, Sinek, sent an envoy to the capital of the Hittite king to discuss an alliance with King Ashur. If Sinek had not suddenly attacked Babylon from the northeast, the Hittite kingdom would not have won the war on the western front, and Ashur was also a direct beneficiary. The two kings had already sent envoys to congratulate each other on the victory. Now that both Assyria and Hittite had gained something, in order to consolidate their gains, Sinek put forward another proposal. He first proposed to form an alliance between the two countries, strengthen trade and trade cooperation, and return fugitive slaves to each other. In addition, Sinek also specifically mentioned the issue of the ownership of the plains of Duk. He suggested that the north and the south divide the plains of Duk equally, so that this 1,000 miles of fertile land would become the new border between the two countries. In Sineka's proposal, the northernmost city of Enril and the northernmost city of Tolan would belong to the Assyrian kingdom, while the southern city of Meso and Budamia would naturally belong to the Hittite kingdom, and it also included a large area of uncultivated land, which was much larger than the current territory controlled by the two countries. Judging from the current practical situation, this proposal was beneficial to both sides. But there was one problem that Sinek deliberately did not mention. He had included the territory controlled by Tolan into the territory of the Assyrian kingdom, and he wanted to test the attitude of the Hittite kingdom. On the surface, the king of Hittite, Ashur, did not want to fall out with the currently powerful Assyrian empire, and the reply he sent was very interesting. He expressed to Sinek that he hoped that the two countries would form a friendly alliance, and at the same time, he addressed Sinek as the great emperor of Assyria. But he also mentioned in his letter that he had conferred the title of Prince of Tolan to Ammon, and that the territory around Tolan was the territory of Prince of Tolan, which belonged to Ammonius. If Ammonius wanted Tolan to submit to the Assyrian Empire, Hittite would not stop it. On the surface, the Hittite kingdom did not oppose the border between the north and the south, but also stated that the ownership of Tolan was not decided by the two countries, but by the choice of the people of Tolan. The Hittite kingdom had just occupied the city of Budamia and the west bank of the Euphrates River not long ago, and the newly established city of Meso was also waiting to flourish. It was a wise choice to establish a foothold in the south of the plains of Duk before expanding, and for the time being, they did not have the strength to spare to fight against the Assyrian kingdom. But Ashur and Sinek were probably well aware that in the future, the two countries would most likely clash on the plains of Duk, and it would depend on whose ambition was greater and whose national power was stronger. Currently, Leng City was a barrier and also a nail that was inserted between the territories controlled by the two countries. King Ashur was also happy to see Tolan fight to the death with the Assyrian Empire. He wanted to consolidate his operations in the south of the plains of Duk, so he adopted a wait-and-see attitude, not directly supporting them militarily, and did not stop the civilian trade and supply of goods. The outbreak of a larger war between Tolan and Enril was initiated by Tolan, because George finally realized the seriousness of the situation. No matter how covert Faust was secretly accumulating his strength, it was impossible to leave no traces, and George's reconnaissance in the sky discovered two anomalies. First, there was a significant increase in the number of people crossing the Saya Plateau. In the past, they were all regular logistics and military teams, but now there were more and more ordinary immigrants in groups. Many people froze to death or even fell to their deaths on the narrow paths of the plateau, but more people succeeded in reaching the city of Enril. Second, Enril had opened up a number of new iron mines at the foot of the plateau, and most of the new arrivals were smelting refined iron. It seemed that Tolan had been developing rapidly in the past 2 years, but the strength of Enril was not as conservative as imagined. If Sinek was free to focus on the plains of Duk after the conquest of the kingdom of Babylon, Tolan would be in a very passive position. It was time for a real decisive battle. As long as Enril was completely defeated and the narrow paths of the Saya Plateau were blocked, Tolan's position would be completely consolidated. Idu also encountered a dangerous situation when he was flying in the sky. He was suddenly attacked by several flying projectiles over the Saya Plateau. At that time, he did not continue to fight and quickly escaped. Later, he found out that the great sage of the Assur kingdom, Faust, had arrived in Enlil city, and the situation was very bad. While George and Aesop were discussing countermeasures, something happened again on the trade route of the charcoal marsh. A caravan was intercepted and a large number of supplies were destroyed in the marsh. There were only two entrances to the trade route in the charcoal marsh, one in the hands of Saya City and the other in the hands of Taling City. It would be difficult for a master to pass through the marsh and ambush in the trade route. What was going on? El Mar, the goddess of the marsh, was ordered to investigate and found that it was the work of Enril. Someone disguised themselves as a caravan and entered the trade route with combat supplies. Tolan currently needed combat supplies, so they also bought weapons from the outside world, and Saya's pass was completely open. But after these people entered the charcoal marsh, they found a suitable place to leave the trade route halfway and hid. They did not attack the official logistical supplies transported by the Hittite kingdom, but a civilian caravan that was trading with Tolan, and then sneaked into the depths of the marsh to hide. El Mar found these people in the marsh and captured them all for interrogation. Only then did she find out that they were spies sent by Enril, and their purpose was to attack the logistical supply line of Tolan. At present, the Hittite kingdom had occupied the city of Budamia and opened a sea route on the northern banks of the inland Hunan. The trade route in the charcoal marsh was no longer as important to the expeditionary army as it used to be, but it was a necessary route for the evacuation of Tolan. Thus, El Mar was ordered to station in the charcoal marsh and strengthen the military forces of the relay stations on the trade route. The accident on the trade route made Aesop realize that he could no longer wait passively. Since there was still no news of Ammonius, he could only retreat to Tolan and decide how to solve the predicament himself. Just then, another small-scale conflict broke out between the two cities. John led the Rangers to defeat a small unit of the Giant Legion who tried to provoke a dispute. George took advantage of the situation to expand the scale of the battle and led the Leng Legion to launch an attack. Today's Leng was far stronger than it was in the past, and an integrated legion of 5,000 soldiers and dozens of priests had been formed. Usually, they were engaged in farming and took turns to drill, and in the event of war, they could all be assembled to the front line. George's strategy was simple and practical. The first step was to take advantage of the arrival of winter to attack the fields outside Enril, so that the enemy could not get food supplies in place. The second step was to bypass the fortified city and cut off the path from the Saya Plateau to the plains of Duk, cutting off the reinforcements of Enril. The third step was to outflank the foot of the plateau, attack the mines, and uproot the peripheral strongholds. The fourth step was to besiege the isolated city of Enril, not by force, but by besieging it. The narrow path of the Saya Plateau was cut off, and the fields and mines outside the city could not be farmed and mined normally. There was no need for a war, and Enril would surrender sooner or later. George wanted to attack the city by force, but the price would be high. The Giant Legion had powerful offensive and defensive equipment, and if the Giant Legion could be lured out of the city to fight, it was also a result that George wanted to see. In the first wave of attack, Leng won, and the residents of Enril who were farming outside the city saw the Leng Legion and killed them. When they arrived, they all fled into the city. George himself set up a line of defense between the two fortresses, and ordered John to lead the vanguard to bypass the city and attack the passage at the foot of the Saya Plateau, and Enril finally met the enemy. The Giant Legion sent the vanguard commander Jufei to lead the chariots and John's cavalry to engage in a chaotic battle at the foot of the plateau. John won and occupied the exit of the narrow path, and ordered people to dig down boulders to temporarily block the road. However, at this moment, Faust suddenly led the main force of the Giant Legion out of the city and went straight for George's formation. Faust did not expect Jufei to win, and he did not send many troops, with the purpose of temporarily restraining John. On the other side, John had just won and blocked the road to the plateau, and Faust sent the main force, which had been preparing for a long time, to the frontal battlefield. George was already prepared, but the strength of Enril exceeded his expectations. As soon as Faust set up the formation, he launched a fierce attack, and the Felix Legion commander jumped off the chariot and rushed to the front with his giant sword. The Giant Legion also placed the heavy crossbows and catapults that were originally used to defend the city into the battle formation, and launched a round of long-range bombardment before the charge, and the Leng Legion could not resist for a while. Fortunately, there were two battle fortresses to rely on, and George commanded the army to retreat until they retreated to the back of the two fortresses, forming a triangular defensive posture. On the one hand, Faust consolidated the front line, and on the other hand, concentrated the siege troops to attack one of the fortresses. At this time, Raphael had been recruited by the Hittite kingdom into the Legion of Anu, Link was still training in the Garden of Eden, and Elmar was sent to garrison the Charcoal Marsh. The two fortresses were guarded by Madanzo and Gabriel, and seeing that the army formation on the plains was about to collapse, and that the fortress's magic formation would not last long, George urgently ordered Gabriel to break out of the encirclement and converge with the Leng Legion. One of the fortresses was finally captured, and the magic formation was also destroyed. The casualties of both armies were not small, but the Leng Legion's losses were obviously greater. More importantly, the connection between the vanguard troops led by John and the main force of the Legion was cut off. When John realized this, he immediately led the cavalry back in an attempt to attack the giant Legion from the front and back. At this time, Faust changed tactics again. He placed the siege troops behind the infantry battle formation, and used catapults and ballistae to stabilize the line of defense. He ordered all forces to resist George's counterattack, and to gather the main force of the chariots to return to meet John's attack. This battle was very tragic. Hardadef led the cavalry and tried to rush back, but they were surrounded. He might have been able to fly and escape at the beginning, but he couldn't abandon his troops because of his duty. When the battle started, he couldn't escape anymore. George also launched a counterattack in an attempt to help John break out of the encirclement, but was blocked by the giant legion's defensive battle formation. The battle was finally disrupted, and George knew that the counterattack to rescue John might not be worth the loss, but he could not give up. Later, the battle formation was tangled together, and Themis led a cavalry to rush out of a bloody path to the battlefield where John was surrounded. She did not have to do this, and this cavalry might have been futile. She only hoped to attract the attention of the besiegers and create an opportunity for John to break out. John saw Themis rush over, her red battle robe like a cloud of fire, and then her horse fell to the ground after being hit by an arrow. She held a sword and fell into a heavy encirclement. Her comrades around her were killed, and a spear pierced through her chest. John let out the last roar of his life, waving his giant sword and rushing over like a madman. Jufei, who chased him all the way and fought with him again, was killed by the berserk John, and John finally fell less than 10 feet away from Themis. The intercepted vanguard troops were completely annihilated, and the giant legion's fighting power after 3 years was far beyond George's expectations. It was meaningless for George to continue to counterattack to rescue, but the two armies were in a stalemate, and it was impossible to retreat at this time. After Faust eliminated John, he organized the chariots to return to the battlefield from both sides of the formation, and George even pushed the last reserve troops into the battlefield. Madanzo, who was guarding the other fortress, led the defending troops to attack from the flank, smashing the chariots on the left flank. Both sides fought until the sky turned dark, and the Cold Legion suffered heavy casualties. This battle was a complete defeat. If the sky had turned dark a little later, and if Metatro had not given up on the unbesieged stronghold in time to lead the last of his troops to reinforce the flank, the retreating Legion of Leng would have been buried here. After collecting the remaining soldiers, both sides had a short rest. One stronghold had been destroyed, but the other stronghold was not lost. George still arranged the battle formation here, and the whole army was shrouded in a solemn and stirring mood. The final battle that decided the fate of the Cold Legion arrived. Murin sent down an oracle, and Aesop led the people in the rear to hold a grand sacrificial ceremony. The officers and soldiers in the front also prayed and called out to Ammonius on the battlefield. Ammonius' towering figure appeared in the sky, flashing with golden light. The Cold Legion instantly felt an indescribable encouragement from despair. But then everyone let out a cry of surprise, because the giant legion's battle formation dispersed, and a stone platform appeared. In front of the stone platform stood Faust, who was holding his staff high, and in the middle of the stone platform, a woman shot an earth-shattering arrow. Chapter 235. As soon as Ammon stepped out of the Eternal Realm, his figure was locked on by Faust's powerful magic. Enril had long calculated that he would not be able to avoid this arrow, so he made this arrangement. If Ammon had not recovered from his serious injuries, he might have really died on the spot. Even if he did not die, this arrow would be enough to make him unable to recover for a long time. What's more, even if Ammon could dodge, he could not make the decision to do so. If he was shot down by this arrow or fled in a panic, then the morale of the army that had just been aroused would completely collapse, and the battle on the plains would become a one-sided massacre. His reaction was one with the fate of thousands of people. Ammon heard a cry of alarm coming from the distant horizon in the direction of Leng. It was the voice of Murin. Then he heard a sneer coming from the direction of the Saya Plateau. It was the voice of Enril. A long time ago, Ammon had seen Enril outside the town of Som, and when he became a god, all his experiences in this life were so clear that he could remember who that person was with just this sneer. Along with the sneer, Enril also sent a message to Ammon's soul: "Congratulations on becoming a god who transcends eternal life. I keep my promise and the agreement with Murin, and I will give you a chance to choose here and now. You can join the Anunnaki and make a vow to me. If you make this choice, you will no longer be a lonely god in the eternal realm, and you will be taken into the divine kingdom of the Anunnaki." For Enril to say such a thing at this time was simply the most fatal interference. If Ammon was ignorant of everything after becoming a god and suddenly stepped out of the void and received this message, his soul would certainly be deeply shocked. But the arrow that was enough to kill him had already been shot. This was a war on earth, and Faust and Samir were not divine emissaries of the Anunnaki. If Ammon liked to curse, he would have poured out all the filthiest language in the world in a roar, but at this moment he was in no mood to care about it. The message sent by Enril only slightly disturbed Ammon's soul, and at the same time, Ammon waved his hand and slashed out a ball of silver light. No matter how capable Ammon was, he did not want to use the body of a god to take this arrow head-on, or he would definitely be injured. Fortunately, he still had a divine artifact, the Edge of Order. The battle axe turned into a crescent moon in the air, and as it spun, it turned into an arc and cut straight at the flying arrow from 100 feet away. What came from the air was a soundless impact, but the people on the ground felt as if their heads were about to split in half. The long arrow had actually been cut in half from the middle, flying in two directions. Before the soldiers of the Legion of Cold Blood had time to cheer, they heard another earth-shattering explosion coming from the sky. Usually, people's concept of an explosion was to scatter in all directions, but the scene in the sky was rapidly shrinking. The two halves of the giant arrow drew a curved arc in the air and actually merged back together, returning to its original form, as if it had never been split in half. The magic formation on the arrow emitted a dazzling black light, and it had already arrived in front of Ammon. The Edge of Order did not really cut the arrow in half, but only cut open a spatial rift. But the energy contained in the arrow was so amazing that it actually passed through the spatial rift and closed again. Ammonius gently waved his hand, brushing away the giant arrow that had shot in front of him, as if he was chasing away a small bug. The giant arrow shot right at his fingertips, froze for a moment, and then with a bang, it turned into countless fragments. The special magic arrow that was stronger than steel was shattered by the force of a wave of his hand. What a shocking collision! Every single shard could penetrate solid armor and kill a strong warrior, but the ground seemed to be completely unaffected by the shards. Ammon's movements seemed to be understated, but it was more strenuous than throwing a punch with all his strength. Waving his hand to shatter the giant arrow, his body also felt a violent impact, and the continuous tremors continued, almost beating him back to his original appearance. Isis's divine guardian was also interrupted, but Ammon did not show any abnormality, and the soft golden light continued to sprinkle down. The divine prayer was no longer cast on the entire legion, but Ammon immediately used a very simple information illusion, still maintaining the scene of the golden light sprinkling down. The excited soldiers did not feel the subtle difference, but instead cheered excitedly in unison. The flying fragments scattered, but did not fall. One of the arrows turned into countless arrows, circling in the air and shooting back. Faust and Samir's goal was not only to shoot down Ammonius, even if they could not make this god fall on the spot, they wanted to force him into a sorry state, so that the soldiers of the Legion could see it with their own eyes. The entanglement of the divine spell was like maggots in a tarsal bone, condensing the force of the impact in the blink of an eye. Aman could no longer put on a casual posture to face the flying fragments of the arrows. However, this attack did not need him to block it himself. A sword ray flew into the sky, with a destructive force, drawing out countless sword rays in the shape of a small fan, striking down all the circling fragments. Gabriel rushed to the sky in front of Aman. This was already the fastest reaction she could make. Samir stood on the stone platform, the hard boulder beneath his feet already covered with cracks. One could imagine how powerful the arrow just now was. She was waiting at ease, with the divine spell formation laid down by the chief priest of the giant legion, Lucian, behind her, and Faust's guidance in front of her. At this moment, the second arrow had already left the bowstring, whistling through the air as it flew towards Gabriel, who had just swung his arrow to cut down the fragments. If Gabriel was shot down right in front of Ammonius, it would have the same effect. Would Gabriel be able to block this arrow in such a hurry? No one knew the answer. This was because as soon as the arrow left the bowstring, Faust let out a cry of surprise and quickly pressed his staff forward. Sand and pebbles flew in front of the two armies, accompanied by all kinds of flashes and sparks from the friction between the rocks and soil. Faust's figure disappeared in an instant. The arrow, on the other hand, shrank into a strange arc unexpectedly. It did not fly into the sky, but instead shot into the cloud of dust. Faust and Samir cooperated very well. Samir only shot the arrow with all his strength, while Faust used spatial magic to lock onto the target. However, Samir was not the only expert archer among the two armies. At the same time that Gabriel rushed into the sky, Madanzo had already leapt off his warhorse and knocked an arrow. The two disciples of Aman also cooperated very well. Gabriel flew into the sky to block the attack, while Madanzo stood on the ground and shot an arrow towards Faust. The distance between the two armies was beyond the range of the catapults. Even the strongest giant warrior could not shoot so far with a heavy crossbow. Madanzo used the divine bow that Gilgamesh had given to Aman. It was forged from Humbaba's tusk and a section of snake's tendon. The arrow it shot was engraved with the patterns of the divine spell formation, and the surface was plated with heavy silver. Echoes that sounded like the roars of thousands of wild bulls came from the wilderness around the battlefield. Metatro had already displayed his godly bow and archery skills on the battlefield. At this stage of the battle, what else had he not used? There was no need for Faust to be so panicked. With such a long distance, he should be able to block the arrow. However, what caused this sage of the state teacher to panic was not the arrow shot by Madanzo. At the very front of the retreating army was the chariot formation. Every chariot had a driver, a gunner with a long shield, and an archer with a sword. At the same time that Madanzo shot that terrifying arrow, on a chariot on the left side of the formation, an archer pursed his lips and knocked an arrow with an expressionless face. He used an ordinary warrior's arrow issued by the army, and the arrow he shot was an ordinary wooden and iron long arrow. Amidst the deafening cheers of his soldiers, he suddenly knocked an arrow. The gunner beside him was startled. It was impossible for him to hit any target. Wasn't he too nervous? In a battle formation, the most taboo reaction was to be so nervous that one forgot to listen to orders. The gunner opened his mouth to berate, but his body froze in place, as if he had already become stupid. When this ordinary warrior pulled the bowstring to its fullest, he released a powerful pressure. In an instant, he was as awe-inspiring and inviolable as a god. His arrow was shot after Madanzo. At this moment, smoke and fire had already exploded in front of the two armies. Madanzo's arrow shot into the smoke and produced a series of explosions. Rocks and dirt flew everywhere, and the smoke and dust that covered the battlefield became even thicker. On the other hand, this warrior's arrow only produced the sound of the bowstring, and the faint echo lasted for a long time. However, when the arrow was shot out, it was soundless. Wherever it passed, the smoke and dust were annihilated, and the flying rocks and dirt were driven back to the ground by a strange force. Even Aman, who was in the sky, sensed this powerful aura. He could not help but lower his head and see the archer clearly from afar. He was extremely shocked. Everyone's impression of Gilgamesh was that he was noble and luxurious. When he went out, he always rode in the most luxurious and comfortable carriage on the continent. He held a golden umbrella, wore a purple cloak, and was accompanied by a guard of honor in bright armor. When he first entered the Babylon kingdom to meet the king, he also dressed like this. But now, Gilgamesh was wearing old linen clothes, a breastplate, and a worn leather shoulder guard on his right shoulder. He held an ordinary warrior's longbow in his left hand and carried a quiver of arrows on his back. He was dressed like an ordinary warrior in the army of Yuleng. If he had not shot such an arrow, even Ammon would not have noticed or even recognized him. It was said that after Enkidu's death, Gilgamesh had passed the position of the city lord to his distant nephew. His recommendation and appointment to the kingdom of Babylon was just a formality. After that, he left Uruk and disappeared without a trace. He never thought that he would appear in the army of Yuleng as an ordinary archer. Yuleng had recruited many wanderers from all over the continent to join the army, but no one expected that Gilgamesh, the hero of the continent, would be among them. With Gilgamesh's arrogance, it was hard to imagine that he would do such a thing. However, there was no time to say anything at this moment. Faust cast all kinds of divine protection spells in an instant, barely blocking the arrow that Metatron shot from afar. However, he could not block the arrow that Gilgamesh shot right after. He hurriedly guided Samir to shoot the second arrow in an arc to meet the incoming arrow. The giant black arrow and the ordinary arrow collided. Gilgamesh's arrow instantly turned into powder, but the powerful impact caused the giant black arrow to vibrate violently in the air, making a buzzing sound like a large bell. The remaining force did not dissipate, and it continued to fly toward Gilgamesh's chariot. Gilgamesh jumped off the chariot, pulled out his sword, and slashed at the arrow. The sword broke, but the giant black arrow finally spun in the air and was caught by the hero. Gilgamesh's position was at the side of the battlefield. He wanted to shoot the arrow at Samir, but he saw the shadow of Enkidu and himself in Samir. After a moment of hesitation, he shot the arrow at Faust, but it was still blocked by Samir's second arrow. After Ammonius appeared in the air, so many shocking changes in the sky and on the ground actually happened in a few breaths, and then the army of Yuleng shouted in unison. This was the best opportunity to launch a charge. The experts had already engaged in battle. George flew into the air and made a concentrated sound of the war drums. The chariot of Yuleng suddenly charged forward, and Madanzo pulled out his sword. Sword rushed to the front while Gilgamesh jumped back into his own chariot. George ordered the priests to start chanting, giving all kinds of blessings to the charging warriors. Everyone raised their heads during the charge, and saw huge fireballs shot by the catapults behind Yuleng's battle formation. In the heat of the moment, people forgot about life and death, and the chariots charged at full speed, quickly passing through the open space. Just as George flew into the air to command the chariots to charge at full speed, he heard a voice from far behind, "George, let me command the chariots." This was too strange. Someone actually proposed a last-minute change of command, and wanted to replace George to command Yuleng. Then, George heard Ammonius' voice in his soul, "Let him command the whole army, you lead the 12 judges and charge with the chariots." George did not understand what was going on, but he resolutely carried out Ammon's oracle. He immediately gave up the commanding position of the central magic formation of the army, and floated into the battle formation, ordering the 12 judges to follow him in the charge. When he flew down, he looked back and saw that the person who took over the commanding position was an old man with a goatee, Goliath. Ammon never thought that he would appear like this, and that he would fall into the ambush of the giant legion. He did not expect that Gilgamesh and Goliath would also rush to the battlefield to help. Gilgamesh participated in the battle as an ordinary archer, and Goliath simply asked to replace George to command the whole army. There was no time to think, and no time to ask anything. Ammon immediately decided to give command of the battlefield to Goliath. At the same time, the charging soldiers looked up at the sky, and saw a silver light flying towards the horizon between the falling fireballs, accompanied by Ammonius' angry roar, "Enril, stop running." See how I'm going to cut you down." This roar was too shocking, even more shocking than the series of earth-shattering battles just now. The great god Enlil was actually fleeing like a rat in front of Ammonius, so what did the soldiers of Yuleng have to fear? The earth-shattering battle cries filled the air, and the battle formations of the two sides collided. In an instant, there was a scene of flesh and blood flying everywhere. In fact, Ammon's roar was not for Enlil, but for the soldiers of Yuleng and the giant legion. Enlil was still quite far away, and Ammon could not see him at all, so how could he know whether he was running or not? He threw the blade of order with all his strength in the direction of the sneer, cutting a series of spatial rifts in an attempt to find Enlil's figure, while he himself turned into a golden light and flew with the battle axe towards the Saya Plateau. From the distant Saya Plateau, 3 lights flew over, bringing with them fire, smoke, and wind. They did not meet Ammon, but plunged into the battlefield where the battle was going on. They were Enlil's divine emissaries, Kibir the god of fire, Nugus the god of ash, and Zhu Xian the god of heavenly bull. Ammon's roar and the flying axe were tantamount to shedding all pretenses of cordiality. He refused Enlil's request and directly challenged another god as a god. Ammon was not a god of the Anunnaki divine clan, and his disciples had also entered the battlefield, so Enlil also ordered his divine emissaries to go to battle, breaking the rules that had been silently observed by the various divine clans for many years. In the past, these divine emissaries carried out tasks in secret, guiding and assisting the believers on earth, and would not directly go to the battlefield. These 3 powerful divine emissaries were forced to fight by Enlil, and Enlil had calculated that Ammon would come at this time and place, but he did not expect that everything that happened later was beyond his control, and he was at a loss in shock. Ammon turned into a golden light and flew away, ready to swing his axe at Enlil, but no one saw Murin also flying after Ammon. At this time, there was another roar from the direction of the Euphrates Valley in the east, and Link flew into the battlefield, waving a long curved sword. He finally passed the test and recovered his strength, and arrived from the Garden of Eden just in time to join the battle. This was not the largest war on the continent, but it must be the most intense. The way the masters fought was different from that of ordinary warriors. Their primary goal was to limit the power of the other side so that the warriors could charge and kill the enemy. But in this war, many divine emissaries had joined, and these people entangled and restricted each other, providing all kinds of protection for the battle formation, but no one wanted to die carelessly. The strength of the retreating Cold Legion was originally not as good as the Giant Legion, and after a great defeat not long ago, they had barely rested and reorganized. Encouraged by their strong spiritual power, they launched a desperate charge, and for a while, they were also in a stalemate. Under the command of Goliath, the retreating Cold Legion took turns to charge, and the battle line always maintained a state of forced intersection, limiting the power of the opponent's long-range catapults and ballistae. In the end, it was another force that decided the outcome of the battle. At the most tragic moment of the battle, Princess Cilia and Seagull led a team of hundreds of elite cavalry and suddenly attacked from the flank of the battlefield, penetrating the battle formation of the Giant Legion, and destroying the catapults and ballistae behind the battle formation. Chapter 236. Cilia was the chief priest of the Legion of Anu of the Hittite kingdom. She should be in Meso City at the moment. Why was she here, and why was Seagull with her? Seagull was the last disciple guided by Ammon so far. He was the least experienced among the divine emissaries of the Garden of Eden, but because of his relationship with Crazy Ol, his identity was incomparable to that of the other disciples. He was also guided by Nietzsche, but Seagull was even a few decades earlier than Ammon. When Ammon met him, Seagull had already achieved the 8th level. What Seagull practiced was not the power of 2 sides. He was actually an 8th level magician, or rather, an 8th level spiritual bird. He was different from ordinary people. His practice was particularly difficult, but at the same time, he also had many special talents. When Seagull received Ammon's guidance, he followed Gabriel to the Garden of Eden, and then to the city of Talang. Knowing the relationship between him and Ammon, the disciples took good care of Seagull. Ammon only had time to guide the process of practicing and testing the power of origin, and then went to the underworld of Osiris. Many specific magic and martial arts practice had not been taught, but everyone was willing to guide Seagull when they had time. Seagull had a very good temper and was curious about everything in the world, like a diligent and good child. As a spiritual bird who had just come to the human city from a deserted island, there were many things to learn. Aesop did not arrange any specific tasks for him to be responsible for, but Seagull was very enthusiastic and willing to help with anything, so he was very popular with everyone. He had decades of practice, and his mind was pure. After receiving guidance from the power of origin and various teachings from everyone, he made rapid progress, and in less than a year, he became an 8th-level divine emissary. But as an 8th-level divine emissary, he was still relatively immature in all aspects, because he had not experienced anything, and naturally could not be compared to Medanzo, who had been exploring with Amon since the beginning of practicing the power of 2 sides. However, Haiwu also had an advantage. In the past few decades, he hadn't thought about anything else at all. He had been cultivating wholeheartedly. It was very difficult for other cultivators to do this, so his magic power was very strong. It just depended on who he was compared to. When he arrived at Salem, the Legion of Anu of the Hittite kingdom entered the plains of Duk to fight against the city of Marduk. The 2 armies were in a stalemate, and the Hittite army had also built the city of Meso in the southern part of the plains of Duk. Leng City was the logistics and supply base for the Hittite expedition. Hence, there were many people coming and going from Leng City. About a year ago, Princess Cilia came to Shaling, and Aesop naturally had to receive her grandly. In the city lord's mansion, all the important figures in Canlang City attended this meeting, and Seagull was also present. This was the first time that Hai Ming had attended such an important, diplomatic, event, and he was quite nervous to see the princess, afraid that he would make a fool of himself. It was really George's fault for not explaining Princess Cilia's origins clearly in advance. Because everyone already knew each other, he only made a special introduction in front of Seagull. George first went to the princess and introduced Seagull. Naturally, it was not convenient to say that he was an oracle from the Garden of Eden in public, so he only said that he was Ammonius' new disciple on earth. Then George said to Seagull, "This charming and beautiful princess is also a powerful 8th-level mage, and a famous summoning mage on the continent." This was supposed to be a normal compliment, but Seagull's face changed, his legs softened, and he was so scared that he plopped down on the ground. "What's going on?" Seagull was no longer as timid as before, but there was one sentence that had long been deeply imprinted in his mind, like a brand into his soul. When Crazy Ol left the island, he once said that the distant continent was very dangerous, and there were powerful summoners who would brand his soul and use him as a summoned beast. Hai Ming was so scared that he did not dare to leave the island in the sea for decades. This was the only nightmare in his pure heart, and the powerful summoners on the continent became demon-like existences in his mind. He was already nervous today, and after hearing Ida's introduction, the devil from his dreams was standing right in front of him. It was as if he had been cursed, and his legs went soft, causing him to lose his balance. This caused Sylvia to jump up in fright. Cilia also asked curiously, "What's wrong with Seagull?" The beautiful princess listened and giggled. The more she looked at Seagull, the more she felt that he was simple and cute. Although the explanation was clear, Seagull was still very nervous when he saw Cilia. He listened to whatever Cilia said, as if he was afraid of being captured and branded with a soul brand, as if it had become an instinct. When George saw Seagull behaving like this, perhaps he was purposely playing a prank, or perhaps he wanted Seagull to train his courage. He actually appointed Seagull as the official receptionist of Taling City, to follow beside Princess Cecilia to ensure her safety. In reality, he would help Cecilia with anything, and would accompany the princess to hunt in the wilderness. The more Cilia looked at Hai Ming, the more she found him interesting. Whenever she spoke a little louder, Hai Ming's face would turn red and he would look very nervous. This was not because he was afraid of her identity as the princess of the kingdom, but purely a habitual reaction. Later, Cilia called Rulio over and had a spar with Seagull. In the end, Rulio was no match for Seagull. This shy disciple of Amon was actually so powerful. After Celia finished her business, she wanted to return to Meso City. City Lord Aesop sent Seagull to escort her. His main task was to escort the convoy of supplies. Celia asked Aesop, "What is Seagull's position in Talang City or Talang Army?" In the end, she found out that Seagull was currently unemployed and was still learning and training. So the princess took the opportunity to make a request, wanting to borrow a person from Talang City. This request was exactly what Aesop wanted. Aesop was thinking of sending Seagull to Meso City. At that time, the Hittite army had already built a dock on the inland lake, and Meso City was in the midst of construction. Aesop was eager to build a good relationship with the other cities and grasp the situation there. It would be best to send someone that both sides could trust. This person must have a clean background and would not cause any fear. At the same time, he must be absolutely loyal to Amon, and also be able to gain the other party's goodwill. It was really not easy to find someone, and Seagull was the perfect candidate. The astute Aesop could also see that Celia seemed to like Seagull very much, and that Seagull should really gain more experience, so he immediately agreed. When Seagull came to Meso City, Raphael also guessed Aesop's intentions, so he suggested that the princess appoint Seagull as her personal guard captain. The original personal guard captain of the princess was an imperial general. Due to the needs of the war, he could be transferred to the front lines. Celia happily agreed. Indeed, there was no personal guard captain more responsible than Seagull. He didn't know how to be lazy at all. Seagull was originally a seagull that had gained intelligence. Later, he gave himself the name Seagull, but Celia told him that this shouldn't be his first name, but his surname, indicating his origin. So Seagull gave himself the name Michael, and his full name was Michael Seagull. Before the war between Talang and Enril City broke out, something happened to the trade route in the charcoal marsh. This trade route was also one of the logistics routes between Meso City and the Hittite kingdom, so Princess Celia attached great importance to it. She had always paid attention to the situation in Talang, so she sent Rulio to assist Elmar in guarding the charcoal marsh. Rulio was a descendant of the seductress mermaid, and could display magical abilities in the marsh area. Then, the battle between Talang and Enril City was unfavorable, and the situation was precarious. City Lord Aesop sent someone to ask for help from Princess Celia. His request for help was very particular. According to normal official procedures, he would either ask for help from the Hittite kingdom, or ask for help from Meiji City, but Aesop went directly to Princess Celia. At that time, the commander of the Anu Legion, Aimi, was in charge of the army in Meso City. When Sylvia approached Aimi to request for him to send troops to assist in the evacuation of Ling City, Aimi refused with a troubled look. There were two reasons why Aimi could not do so. On the one hand, the mobilization of the army required the order of the king, and the Legion of Anu could not make the decision on his own. On the other hand, there was an agreement between Talang and the Legion of Anu that the regular combat troops of the Legion of Anu could not enter the territory of Talang. This was originally a mutual measure of mutual respect, but now it had become an excuse. In fact, the attitude of the Hittite kingdom towards Talang was to wait and see. They would provide logistical support, but not direct military support. Even if King Ashur knew about this, he would not mobilize the army. Seagull was so anxious that he cried. He immediately asked Princess Celia to let him go back alone to rescue Talang. At this time, a respected old man came to Meso City. It was Goliath. Celia hurriedly asked Goliath what to do. Goliath frowned and said, "Commander Amy cannot mobilize the army without permission. This is also a decree of the kingdom. However, your highness can visit Talang in your private capacity. This does not violate any agreement, and you have the right to bring your personal guards to protect your own safety." After saying this, Goliath looked at Celia. Everyone knew what it meant to bring her personal guards to visit Talang at this time. It all depended on whether the princess had the heart and courage to do so. In the end, Celia slammed the table and ordered Seagull to assemble the personal guards. Seagull was so touched that he almost cried again. By the time Amy heard the news and rushed over, the princess had already left. Amy was shocked. Cilia was the chief priest of the Legion of Anu, and also had the responsibility of supervising the army. Furthermore, she was the princess of the kingdom. If anything happened to her, Amy would not be able to bear the consequences. Even if the princess returned unharmed, he would not be able to bear the consequences if she held a grudge against him. With a bitter face, he quickly asked Goliath for advice. Goliath stroked his beard and said, "There is a war in Talang, and it is indeed dangerous for the princess to visit at this time. You should send someone to protect her. Remember, this is sending someone to protect the princess, it is justifiable." Amy immediately reacted and sent 500 cavalrymen out of the city to protect Princess Cilia. The number of Princess Cilia's personal guards was not small to begin with, and because of the war, there were 300 elites. The cavalrymen sent by Amy were also the elite main force of the legion. These 800 people rushed to the front line of the battle between Talang and Enrol. Although Amy did not receive orders to send troops to participate in the war, he only sent someone to protect the princess. If the princess brought this cavalry to the battlefield, and the king blamed her in the future, the princess would be the one to bear the blame, not to mention there was Goliath as a witness. Even King Asher had to give Goliath face. Amy was still a little worried after the cavalry was sent out. He said to Goliath worriedly, "The princess has never really been to the front line. I am afraid that she will get involved in the battle as soon as she arrives in Talang. Although the cavalry will protect her, I am also afraid of accidents. Respected Supreme Mage, what do you think?" Goliath waved his hand and said, "This is really worrying. How about this, I will also go to Talang and see the situation there in the name of a private visit." Amy finally heaved a sigh of relief, and was very grateful to Goliath. If even Goliath went, no one would be able to blame him if anything happened. This arrangement was already extremely benevolent. It was rare that Sir Goliath, who was respected by the entire nation, was willing to help like this. In fact, Goliath's intention was to save Talang, and he would bring as many soldiers as he could. According to the current situation, it was too late to send infantry, and it was impossible to mobilize the chariots. 800 elite cavalrymen was already the best result. Goliath gave a few more instructions to his student Raphael before leaving. He set off after the cavalry, but he arrived at the front line first, and took over the command of the battlefield at the most appropriate time. At the critical moment when the two armies were locked in battle, Cilia and Seagull arrived with 800 elite cavalrymen and inserted themselves into the battle formation to become the final force to decide the outcome of the battle. There was also a thrilling scene on the battlefield. Cilia had indeed never been to the front line, and it was unlikely that she would be able to do so given her status. For the first time, she led the cavalry to insert from the flank. As a supreme mage, she actually rushed to the front, leaving more than half of her bodyguards behind. She did not have time to set up a wedge-shaped defensive formation, and was in a very dangerous situation in the chaos. Seagull was also a veteran, but he knew the danger as soon as he saw this position. He immediately let out a long roar and rushed into the sky, transforming into a giant gull and diving straight down in front of Cilia's horse. Many of the soldiers of the giant legion were terrified and shouted, "Horus, it's the god of Igut, Horus!" Seagull's speed was very fast. He transformed into a giant bird and swooped down from the sky. There was no time to distinguish between a poison and an eagle in the light of the swords. When Amon lost the Uruk Legion on the battlefield, Horus had transformed into a giant eagle to help. This had already become a myth that had spread throughout the continent. When Seagull appeared on the battlefield, the first thought that came to most people's mind was Horus. The horror in their hearts could be imagined, and no one had time to think about how Horus could appear here. Seagull also did not expect that covering Cilia's charge in a moment of desperation would have such a good effect on the enemy. Cilia took the opportunity to lead the cavalry to break through the battle formation. The bodyguards and cavalrymen behind her also had no choice but to rush forward desperately, because the princess had already rushed to the front, and they had to chase after her to protect her. Princess Cilia was unharmed, but Seagull, who was covering her, was seriously injured. Samir, who was in the battle formation, realized that something was wrong when he saw the cavalry suddenly appear and shot an arrow at Cilia. The black magic arrow used by Samir was very precious, and it was impossible to shoot many in a row, so he only prepared 3 arrows and used other arrows in battle. This last black arrow was shot at the supreme mage Cilia, who had escaped the protection of her bodyguards. If it hit Cilia, she would not be able to block it. Seagull transformed into a giant bird and landed on the side of Cilia's horse to block the arrow. He was seriously injured on the spot and was rescued by the cavalry behind him. When Seagull woke up, he was already lying in the city of Salem. Princess Cilia was sitting at the table in front of the bed, holding her chin in her hands and looking at him with tears in her eyes. In this battle, the Salem Legion finally defeated the Giant Legion, beheaded and captured more than 2,000 enemies. The chief priest of the Giant Legion, Lucian, was killed, and the remaining enemies fled into the city of Enril, relying on the city's defenses to hold their ground. Zhu Xian, the Sky Bull god, was shot down by Gilgamesh's arrow while covering the retreat of the remaining soldiers. However, the price paid by the Salem Legion was also huge. Nearly 1,000 people were killed and countless wounded. Seagull was seriously injured but managed to survive. Metatro and Idu were also injured. 3 of the 12 judges who followed Idu were killed in battle. The losses could not be said to be heavy. After this battle, it was impossible for the Giant Legion to leave the city to fight again, but the Salem Legion was temporarily unable to launch a siege. This was a tragic victory, and there were still many things to deal with. Aesop allowed the Giant Legion to send people out of the city to collect the corpses. At the same time, he buried the bodies of his fallen soldiers, treated the wounded, and rewarded the meritorious personnel. Ammonius only appeared on the battlefield once, and then he did not show up again. The rest was human affairs. His task as the guardian of the city had been completed. Ammon flew from the battlefield to the Saya Plateau, but he did not catch up with Enril. That god obviously did not want to fight with him now. After sending out the oracle to fight, he stepped into the void and disappeared. Ammon was caught up by Murin. Murin asked Ammon about the process of becoming a god and told Ammon 2 things. The communication between gods was simple. The information imprinted into the soul could be clearly explained. Murin was also amazed by Ammon's experience of meeting Schrödinger again. She never expected that Schrödinger was Artemis, the god of the distant Olympian pantheon, who now had the achievement of the creator and was willing to lead Ammon to join the Olympian pantheon. But before Ammon had time to answer, he was summoned to the battlefield. Murin told Ammon that he was still not a match for Enril. Enril not only had the achievement of the creator, but he had also become the king of gods and cultivated for many years. No matter how strong Ammon was, he could not defeat Enril at this time. The reason why Enril retreated was also because he had always been used to planning before taking action. He would not act rashly before figuring out the details of Ammon. Chapter 237. Murin also told Ammon that, the test of fate, the judgment of the end of days, it was not just once. For the gods, they would experience it every time they entered and exited the immortal eternity. The intensity of the test was only related to what the gods did when they entered the divine kingdom or the human world this time. Sometimes the fall of gods was not because they were killed by someone, but because of their own actions, which was different from mortals with limited lives. This was what Artemis did not have time to tell Ammon. Murin imprinted the information into Ammon's soul, then pulled his sleeve and looked up at him and said, "You have become a god who transcends eternal life, but you have not joined any divine clan. The agreement between the gods may have nothing to do with you, but if you don't pay attention, you may become the enemy of all the divine clans." For various reasons, the gods did not directly intervene in the struggles of the human world after transcending eternal life, and they could direct the oracles to assist their believers in everything. And the oracles more or less understood the path to transcendence and eternal life, so they were not willing to directly appear and participate in the struggles of the human world except for the mission that they had to complete. Needless to say, the oracles were also different from ordinary mortals, although they were still mortals. Especially after passing the test of endlessness and mastering the 9th level of the power of origin, those oracles could be called gods in the human world. Many ordinary believers could not even tell the difference between such gods and the real gods who transcended eternal life. Such 9th level oracles usually avoided conflicts that might lead to their death, and solved problems through various agreements like the gods. And as a real god, it was already a kind of agreement not to directly intervene in the struggles of the human world. Of course, this agreement was not absolute binding, but just the way the gods got along. After going through hardships and the greatest test of the human world, they finally obtained eternal life, and naturally they were unwilling to solve problems in the way mortals destroyed each other. Agreements were sometimes broken, such as the War of the Gods broke out within the various divine clans, and there were also conflicts between the divine clans. The result was clear to everyone, that was the fall of many gods, but no one could guarantee that the one who fell would not be themselves. The fact that the gods did not intervene in the struggles of the mortal world did not mean that there would be no conflicts between them and mortals. It was just that most of the time, they were unwilling and did not need to intervene personally. Amon hadn't joined any god system yet, so in theory, he didn't have to abide by this agreement. But in reality, breaking this agreement would arouse the suspicions of the other gods, and it wouldn't do anyone any good. However, today's situation was an exception. Ammonius had been directly summoned to the battlefield, and Faust and Samuel had shot out that arrow. That was a mortal's challenge. If Ammonius wanted to kill them, the gods would not have any objections, and it had nothing to do with the agreement. But from another perspective, Samuel and Faust were only fighting. Regardless of whether they were humans or gods, they were all enemies. That arrow had to be shot. After listening to this, Amon suddenly remembered something. He grabbed one of Murin's hands and said, "Yun Namna, back then at the Kenmit defensive line, in order to save me from Enkidu, you also violated this agreement by taking a sword to the battlefield." Yun Namna lowered her head and pouted slightly. "I like to hear you call me Yun Namna. I did enter the battlefield in a moment of desperation, and I tried my best not to reveal my identity. I wore the armor of your personal guard, and I didn't launch any attacks. I only blocked Enkidu's sword, but Enkidu recognized me." Amon, it was also in that battle that Horus appeared on the battlefield involuntarily, just like me today, so Marduk had an excuse. But you weren't involuntarily at that time, thank you. Yun Namna still lowered her head. "You didn't understand this until today, and I have been looking forward to you becoming a true god who transcends eternal life. Seth was waiting for you at the mouth of the Nile River, so I thought of a way to summon you here. But I almost fell into Enrol's trap. I knew that you couldn't bow to Enrol, and I wanted to bring you to join Marduk's camp in the Anunnaki divine clan. You have entered the eternal realm of immortality, and you should understand that the guidance of the divine clan is not only before you become a god. But now that Marduk has been losing ground, and you have the protection of a creator in the Olympian divine clan, I know what choice you will make, and I can fully understand." It was clearly a simple message that could be communicated directly through the soul, but Inanna just had to say it word by word. She lowered her head and pouted her lips like a girl who was about to give up her love. After Amon became a god, he felt that Yun Namna seemed to have changed a little, because he himself had become a god, and the feeling between the two had changed subtly. They could already enjoy eternal life together, but Amon obviously would not enter the same divine realm as Yun Namna. Looking at the appearance of this goddess, she was as delicate as the shepherdess on the steppe back then, and there was no need for pretense in the communication between the two gods, but listening to the tone of the goddess's voice, it was obvious that there was some bitterness, and there was also a kind of regret and grievance. Amon was originally burning with anger and swinging his battle axe to chase after another god, but at this moment his anger inexplicably turned into a soft feeling, and he put his arm around Yun Namna's shoulder and patted her gently. "Thank you for spending so much effort to get me out of trouble. After becoming a god, I will still not join the Anunnaki divine clan, regardless of whether Marduk lost to Enrol or not, regardless of whether Artemis appeared or not. I didn't have time to answer Schrödinger's question, but I can tell you the answer. The position of that cat in my heart has never changed, and I will always be grateful to Schrödinger himself or the goddess Artemis, but I will not join the Olympus divine clan. Before I understood the power of the origin, I had refused the greatest temptation on earth, and after becoming a god, I will not be swayed by another temptation. The image of the two of them hooking up had appeared countless times on earth, but at this moment in the clouds, this was the first time that Amon had taken the initiative to put his arm around Yun Namna's shoulders. When Yun Namna heard these words, she looked up in surprise and asked, "You won't join the Olympus divine clan? Schrödinger will be disappointed, and your situation is also very dangerous. Even if you join Marduk's camp now, I'm afraid it will be difficult for you to protect yourself, and you have also offended the main god of the Ennead, Seth." In Yun Namna's view, Amon's choice was tantamount to cutting himself off from the gods, and her tone was no longer sour, but a kind of concern and worry. Amon nudged her forehead with the tip of his nose and smiled. "Schrödinger will not be disappointed, she knows me very well, so she is only providing a possibility of shelter, but I can't rely on the shelter of the Olympus divine clan forever. Sometimes the gods would rather risk falling to make the necessary choice, such as I must kill Seth with my own hands." Yun Namna pouted and looked at Amon and said, "It seems that I don't know you as well as that cat, and because of Maria, I also know that you will not let Seth go. Maybe I made you miss the best chance to kill him, I didn't expect." But Amon interrupted her and said with a smile, "Goddess of youth and love, we can also have the achievements of the Creator." Yun Namna said with some grievance, The so-called curse that the gods ridiculed me with was an obstacle to me becoming a creator, and I thought that when you became a god, this curse would be broken. But now you are not enjoying that eternal life, but will instead be in a more dangerous situation. You have made such a choice, and I am also in a very awkward situation." Amon held her soft body to his chest. "If I join the Olympus divine clan, I will be in a more awkward situation." What did that mean? Amon's shrine was in the city of Talang, and it was the divine realm of the Anunnaki divine clan, and Amon stood on the altar with Murin in his arms. But if he joined the Olympus divine clan, such a shrine would be tantamount to provoking a dispute between the two divine clans. He might as well not join any divine clan and continue to stand there with Murin in his arms, showing his attitude that although he would not join the Anunnaki divine clan, he would share the divine realm with Murin. Yun Namna finally smiled happily and rubbed her cheek against Amon's shoulder. "So you are so thoughtful. But I am worried about another thing. Do you know the oath that the gods make when they join a certain divine clan? There may be fights between the gods of the same divine clan, but they have a common oath. When a god outside the divine clan challenges a god of the same divine clan, they must not help the challenger attack the god of the same divine clan. That is to say, if Amon challenged Enlil, Yun Namna could not fight with Amon, and at most, she could only help the defeated Amon escape, such as the situation today. If Yun Namna wanted to challenge Enlil with Amon, it would be the best choice to let Amon join the Anunnaki, but Amon now had a powerful helper like Artemis, and as long as he joined the Olympian divine clan, he could get good protection. But Amon did not intend to join the Olympian divine clan either. If a god wanted to get rid of the oath of joining a divine clan, he would have to achieve the achievements of the god of creation and set up another divine clan. But this was almost impossible for the vast majority of gods. Amon leaned gently in Yun Namna's ear and said, "My wish after becoming a god is very simple, to kill Seth, and hope that I will be lucky enough to find the reborn soul of Maria, help you break the so-called curse, and finally build a divine realm of my wish." When Amon crossed the Saya desert to pass the test of endless life and death, he had made a vow: "If one day, when I will pass the test of fate, my wish is not to join or build such a divine clan or become such a god. I want to build a home of faith, which can guide all who yearn for it, and not be guided by the gods. The so-called gods are no longer gods, but gods in people's faith. People can choose a heaven-like home in their lives, or endure the hell-like torment in their hearts. This is my wish to become a god, and the path under my feet will eventually lead there." The message was imprinted in Yun Namna's soul, and the goddess opened her mouth in surprise, looked up in Amon's arms and said, "My god, is this simple? You actually have such a vow. Ammon replied, since the gods have eternal life, don't waste this eternity. I don't know if I can fulfill my wish, but I will go on like this. Yun Namna reached out and gently pinched his waist. No matter how grand the vow is, you can only do what is right in front of you. You took so long to come back, can you go to my rose garden first? Ammon, I will first deal with the Garden of Eden and Shalom, and then I will go to the rose garden. Right now there are 2 guests I must personally receive. Yun Namna suddenly smiled, and this smile was like a spring flower. I understand, in fact, my curse does not exist at all. You go first, I will wait in the rose garden. Ammon first returned to the Garden of Eden, and led the disciples to bury John and Themis there. He also made another vow, if he could see their new souls again in the human world, no matter where and how much time had passed, he was willing to do everything he could to guide them. After the war, there were still many things to deal with. Apart from Moses who stayed in the Garden of Eden, the disciples all returned to Shalom. In the midst of the busy work, Seagull, who was recovering from his injuries, was the most leisurely and comfortable. Master Sursans insisted on personally healing Seagull, and every day, she used various magic to repeatedly test which kind of blessing had the best effect. Ammon returned to Shalom, but he did not show up. Some things did not belong to the gods, and if he appeared in public, it would instead cause the people to gather around and worship him, which would affect the normal order of the city. In the district rebuilt by the Dushans, there were 2 buildings built by Ammonius himself. One was the small building where Maria used to live, and the other was the courtyard where Ammon grew up. The structure was exactly the same as before. In the backyard next to the craftsman's workshop, there was an ordinary wooden table and 3 rough stools. Around this table sat the most powerful figures in the continent, and on the table was the best wine in the world. These 3 people were Ammon, Goliath, and Gilgamesh. Ammon did not appear here as a god. Without looking at the other 2, it was as if he had entered another time and space. He had grown up, but he was still a minor in Duk. Ammon had made his name on the battlefield. Back then, he had led the army to fight against the Hittite army and the powerful Uruk legion, and the other 2 armies were led by Goliath and Gilgamesh. The enemies, who had once fought against various countries, were now sitting together drinking wine. Goliath was still Goliath, but Gilgamesh was no longer the governor of Uruk. As for Ammon, he had become a god. Ammon first gave a toast to the 2 guests to express his gratitude, as if he was treating them to his own home. If it weren't for the help of Goliath and Gilgamesh, the Legion of Cold would not have been able to achieve such a great victory, and before the 2 of them rushed to the battlefield, they did not know that Ammon would appear as a god. In other words, they did not know that the Shalom Legion would win, but they still came. Ammon was not surprised that Goliath would come, but Gilgamesh's appearance was unexpected. Ammon wanted to ask after the toast, but Gilgamesh had already answered Ammon's doubts with a silent wave of his hand. Gilgamesh, who was no longer ostentatious, looked a little thinner than before. He was still wearing the coarse linen clothes of an archer. As a supreme mage, he did not carry a single instrument on him, and of course, he did not have a staff. He had cast message magic out of thin air, showing both a scene and a voice. It was a miserable scene of corpses strewn all over the ground, smoke rising from the ruins of villages and towns, mixed with the screams and cries of women and children. Many skinned corpses were hung on wooden stakes, dried under the scorching sun. From afar, it looked like hell on earth, even more terrible than the underworld that Ammon had been to. This was the scene of the Assyrian emperor, Sinnach, leading his army to pillage and massacre the kingdom of Babylon. Gilgamesh's voice came from the light. I was wandering in despair when I heard the news of the kingdom's defeat. I rushed there and saw it with my own eyes. Then, I heard that the Uruk legion was defeated by the Hittite kingdom. In the city where I lived since I was a child, thousands of my people became prisoners of war in Meso. Gilgamesh made a request as soon as he opened his mouth, not only to Ammon, but also to Goliath. He hoped to save these prisoners and not let them become slaves of the Hittites. Currently, the kingdom of Babylon and Uruk were unable to save these people. Other than a few nobles, they had also given up on the idea of redeeming so many slaves. Goliath glanced at Ammon, who nodded. Goliath said, "I will do my best to help them reach Talang. Talang will give them land and freedom. As for whether to return to Uruk or not, let them choose for themselves." Ammon sighed. The Uruk Legion actually suffered such a crushing defeat. Who was the commander? Gilgamesh shook his head. "I can't say that they were incompetent. The kingdom of Babylon was defeated on the eastern front and urgently called for reinforcements. During the retreat, they were chased by the Hittite army. The Uruk Legion covered the rear of the army as they crossed the river, so they suffered the greatest losses. There's no need to mention the commander, he's my distant nephew. As for the chief priest, At this point, he snorted coldly and raised his head to look at Ammon. "You have become a god. Although we used to be enemies, I have always admired you. You have also taught many geniuses. But this one doesn't seem like his teacher at all." Ammon frowned. "Is he my student?" Gilgamesh nodded. "His name is Cain, and he is now a supreme mage. Back then, he even practiced body arts under my guidance. But I thoroughly investigated your whereabouts in Uruk City, and many of his performances were beyond my expectations. Later, I realized that he was a student under your guidance." When Abel died on the battlefield, Cain followed the Uruk Legion back to Uruk. Ammon only taught the brothers the first 6 levels of the power of 2 sides. After Gilgamesh left Uruk, Cain, without Ammon's guidance, made a breakthrough on his own and became a 7th-level supreme mage in the eyes of the world. When the Uruk Legion set off again, Cain's identity was the chief priest. Prince Banut led the army to the capital, and the Uruk Legion suffered heavy losses. Cain led the remnants of the legion back to the capital. Chapter 238. At this point, Ammon didn't need to hide anything anymore. He calmly replied. "Cain and his brother Abel once saved me. In return, I gave them another kind of guidance. But at that time, my achievements weren't high, and I didn't expect that I would have this day. They weren't my students, and I didn't continue to guide them in their cultivation. Now that Abel is dead, I'll go find Cain when I get the chance. I want to ask him something." Gilgamesh suddenly asked, "Did you teach them the secret to becoming a god?" Ammon shook his head gently. "No, I called it the power of 2 sides. I was still exploring it at that time." As he spoke, he imprinted a complicated message into Gilgamesh and Goliath's souls. It was the guidance of the power of origin, containing the secret to becoming a god. It was the summary of all his years of exploration. Goliath already knew about the power of 2 sides, but it was the first time he heard about the cultivation of the power of origin. As for Gilgamesh, he had asked Murin, but Murin didn't give him an answer. Only the gods' emissaries, who received guidance from the various divine systems, could learn all of this after swearing an oath. However, Ammon didn't receive guidance from any divine system. Today was the first time he revealed this secret to anyone other than his disciples. He didn't hide anything from these 2 old friends. Not only did the information contain the secret of the power of origin, but he also explained the principles of the various divine systems. He also explained the final test that the divine systems wouldn't mention when guiding the emissaries. Gilgamesh and Goliath looked at each other and fell into deep thought. Gilgamesh's eyes shone with inexplicable tears, but they didn't fall in the end. They were also explorers, but in this way, they obtained the answer they had been searching for many years. Gilgamesh finally understood why Enkidu died. He also understood the meaning of Enkidu's last words before he died. When Enkidu rushed into the grey vortex, he shouted at him, "Gil! I finally understand. This is not the curse of the gods, but the judgment of fate." What Enkidu cultivated was not the power of the origin. He was a pure warrior. He had actually reached the peak of human achievement by relying on physical cultivation. When the final test came and he comprehended the origin of power, it was already too late to explain it to Gilgamesh. If Enkidu had succeeded, he would have become a god, the first god who had broken through the power of origin by cultivating only body techniques. Unfortunately, he had failed. After a long time, Gilgamesh was the first to speak. If I can reach that step, no matter what method I use, I'm afraid I won't be able to pass the final test. Goliath looked at Gilgamesh and silently sighed. This meant that Gilgamesh really wouldn't be able to pass the judgment of fate, judgment of Armageddon. Goliath already understood, but he didn't say anything. Gilgamesh picked up his glass and drank it, then looked around and asked, "Aman, is this where you grew up?" Aman nodded, "Yes, I grew up here. But now this house is new, while this used to be old." Gilgamesh put down his glass and heavily slammed it on the table, then sighed, "This isn't fair." The meaning of this sentence was very complicated. In terms of intelligence, Gilgamesh wasn't inferior to Aman. He was born the son of a city lord, so he enjoyed all kinds of glory and had an incomparably noble status. If he wanted to learn something, he would have the best teacher. If he wanted something, there would always be someone who would do everything possible to give it to him. Gilgamesh was arrogant and extravagant, but he wasn't an indulgent playboy. He had his own pursuits and ambitions, and he also had achievements that the entire continent envied. But what did Aman have? Aman had nothing. He was just the son of a drunkard, a lowly miner, and he lost his hometown and loved ones at a young age. Compared to Gilgamesh, this was naturally unfair. But Gilgamesh's words didn't mean this. He wasn't Aman, and he hadn't experienced all of this. The nobility that he had, General Aman also had, but he hadn't experienced the life that Aman had witnessed. If it came from someone else's mouth, this sentence might seem pretentious, but Gilgamesh seemed to be speaking from the bottom of his heart. Goliath muttered, "Maybe it's because life is so different that there's a need for that endless cycle of growth and death. Gilgamesh, if you cultivate the power of origin, I believe that you will definitely have some achievements. But back then, it was very difficult for you to pass the endless cycle of growth and death, not to mention the final step of transcendence and eternal life." Gilgamesh was slightly startled. He looked down at the empty cup in his hand and said, "You are right. You are the wise man of the continent. You understood the truth in a flash. It was indeed difficult for me to pass the endless cycle of growth and death. But now I am proving it in another way. It is not pure power, but an imprint in the soul." Goliath, every 9th level mage has a different way of advancing. Have you experienced the endless cycle of growth and death? Goliath recalled, "I advanced to the 9th level shortly after the Great Flood. In meditation, I saw the ups and downs of the people, and their thoughts seemed to be a reflection of my soul. It was a very similar experience, but not entirely the endless cycle of growth and death. It was a kind of breakthrough in mastering magic. The understanding of the soul depends on one's own feelings, and there is no clear guidance." Gilgamesh grabbed the flagon and poured wine for everyone. He raised his cup and toasted to Aman, "Thank you." Goliath also toasted, "Thank you for letting me understand all this and answering too many questions in this life. It may be too difficult for me to verify all the tests of the power of origin from the beginning, but at least I will not have unsolved regrets in this life." He was already one of the top supreme mages on the continent. Witnessing the endless cycle of growth and death was not a very difficult test for Goliath. But what made people speechless was that the first test of low-level achievement was very difficult for Goliath to pass. Looking back on his life, Gilgamesh also understood that it would be difficult to pass that test. The test of fate, the judgment of the end of days. They were the top masters of the world, and even had the power to fight the gods, but in this life, it was very difficult for them to become gods who transcend eternal life. But listening to their tone, there was more relief than regret, at least their lifetime of exploration had finally been verified. After putting down the cup, Gilgamesh said to Goliath, "In fact, you can also go to the end of human achievement, just like Enkidu, he only practices body arts, while you only practice magic. You can also understand the origin of power at the last moment, it's just that," Goliath smiled bitterly and said, "It's just that I don't have such a strong bloodline, and I can't practice it." I can only catch a glimpse of the brilliance after transcendence when the test of fate comes. Then they seemed to have a tacit understanding and stopped talking about this topic. The secret of the power of origin had been understood. Regardless of whether there was hope to transcend eternal life or not, people like Goliath or Gilgamesh would not change their minds because of this. Changing the topic, they talked about the situation after the battle between Leng and Enlil. Enlil suffered a great defeat, and the main force of the giant legion suffered nearly half of the casualties, so it was impossible for them to leave the city in a short period of time. But this city was very difficult to take down. Defending a city was different from attacking a city. It did not necessarily need elite troops, just organized labor on the city walls. The city built by the Highland giants was tall and strong, and built a variety of defensive equipment. There were also a lot of resources stored in the city, enough to defend for a long time. The losses of the Leng Legion were also heavy. After 2 consecutive battles, more than half of the total population of Leng was lost, and more than a tenth of the total population of Leng was lost. In a long war of attrition, production and farming were needed in the rear. The current situation was impossible to launch continuous attacks. The best strategy was to not let the giant legion leave Enlil, and at the same time focus on recuperation and production in the rear. If the situation continued to develop like this, Enlil would surrender sooner or later, but there was one person who would never sit back and watch, and that was Emperor Sinuc of Assur. The Assyrian Empire was currently at its most powerful period in history. The Kingdom of Babylon had lost half of the original 18 city-states of Kish on the west bank of the Euphrates River, and had to give up the newly established city of Marduk. The heaviest loss was the ceding of 6 city-states in the northeast. This was equivalent to half of the original land of the Assyrian Empire, and most of it was fertile farmland. The Assyrian Empire was now called the Assyrian Empire. Not only did it gain large tracts of fertile land and a large population, but its social structure had also changed. The Assyrian warriors became the new nobles and the upper class of the new territory, while the residents of the former Babylon kingdom were scattered and moved to become laborers at the bottom. The food and supplies they provided supported the Assyrian army to launch a new round of conquest, and more Assyrian laborers left production and became professional soldiers. After the kingdom of Babylon submitted, Sinuc was full of ambition, and he would never be willing to give up the plains of Duk. What's more, he had already sent the giant legion to the plains of Duk and spent several years building a city, which was equivalent to stabbing a knife into it. At the end of the war against Babylon, when the power of the country was at its peak, he would never accept the result of being defeated by the small city of Salem. No matter the cost, Sinuc would continue to reinforce the city of Enlil. The cost of the expedition across the Assyrian plateau was great, but why would the cruel Sinuc care? All he cared about was his own achievements and the enjoyment of the achievements of conquest. Goliath analyzed Sinuc's character, and without any great prophecy, he knew that the emperor would inevitably adopt a strategy. The foot of the Assyrian plateau would probably be littered with corpses, and the endless attacks would eventually break through the city of Salem. An empire like this, after accumulating power for many years, would suddenly rise to power very quickly, and it would seem invincible for a while, but the speed of its decline would also be very fast. But before the collapse of the Assyrian Empire, the first to fall was the city of Salem, encountering its strongest period of rise. The few people present were the most prestigious commanders on the continent, and they saw the victory in front of Salem, but there was no way to prevent the fate of defeat in the future, because the opponent was a cruel and powerful madman. Gilgamesh looked at the wine in his glass and said expressionlessly, "Gentlemen, if Salem wants to have a long-term foothold in the plains of Duk, it must first break the city of Enlil and expand its control to the foot of the Assyrian plateau. In the current situation, there is no possibility of military victory, and there is only one way, and that is to get rid of Sinuc himself." Ammon already had this idea in mind, and when he heard Gilgamesh mention it, he also spoke up. "Assassinate Sinuc? He is not the Hittite king Lucier of the past. I have already seen a 9th-level supreme warrior on the battlefield, and the commander of the army of Enlil is also a great mage. Sinuc is so cruel, there are too many people on the continent who want to kill him, so his defenses must be very tight. even if experts like us assassinate him, the chances of success are very small. And there is another most important problem: the Assyrian Empire has embarked on the path of a military state. Even if we assassinate an emperor, it will not stop the advance of this chariot. Alexander tapped his finger lightly on the table and said, "So not only do we have to eliminate Sinek, but we also have to reverse the national policy of the entire Assyrian Empire in order to save the current situation." The 9th-level supreme warrior you are talking about is the Queen of Assyria, Samir. And you may have heard of that supreme mage, the sage of Assyria, Faust. Aman was taken aback. Empress. She was the assassin who tried to assassinate the adoratress at the blessing ceremony of Isis, and Faust was the assassin's assistant. At that time, she was already the empress and the sage of Assyria. Why would she sneak into Iga to do such a thing? Gilgamesh slammed the table and said, "That's why I said Sinek is a madman. The purpose of doing so is to frame me and Enkidu." Goliath interrupted, "Based on my understanding of Faust, it could be a ploy, but I didn't think that Sinek would be willing to send his own queen. After Enkidu, Samir should be the strongest warrior on the continent." Aman suddenly remembered what Yun Namna once said: the gods agreed not to directly intervene in the battles of the mortal world, but there was one exception, a mortal who challenged or offended the gods, such as the arrow that Faust and Samir shot into the sky. He turned to Goliath and asked, "If we want to get rid of Sinek, do we first have to get rid of these two people?" "I can find an opportunity to do it." Goliath shook his head and said, "No, not only are they the people Sinek relies on the most, but Faust is also Sineka's most trusted person. But if we want to get rid of Sinek and change the policies of the Assyrian Empire, we need the help of these two people. Otherwise, just killing a single Assyrian emperor wouldn't have been of much use." Gilgamesh stared at Goliath and suddenly asked, "I heard that Faust is a friend of yours for many years, is that right?" Goliath nodded and said, "Yes, he is a good friend of mine, and we have a very close personal relationship. The reason why I say this is not because of my friendship with him, but because I know him. When I heard that Faust had come to Enril, I knew that the army of Salem was no match for him, so I rushed over. And I'm afraid you haven't heard the latest news, but Faust is also quite dissatisfied with what Emperor Sinek is doing now." He introduced what he knew about Faust and Samir. Although Faust looked wrinkled, he was not old, only in his 50s. When he was young, he went to the Hittite kingdom to study under Goliath, and his outstanding talent and diligent spirit left a deep impression on Goliath. Later on, the two became very close and often discussed various issues through letters. Faust's hobby was not only magic, he loved to learn everything in the world, and it was said that he had read all the books in the Assyrian shrine archives, and could even accurately recite the contents of every page and every line of every volume. As far as Goliath knew, this rumor was true. Faust's title as the sage of the nation, and he was revered as the most knowledgeable person in Assur. And Goliath also knew that Faust was versatile, and he was also a master scroll maker whose level was not inferior to Nero in the past, but he did not make as many scrolls as Nero. Because Faust believed that it was not worth wasting his limited life on such things. He had two wishes: one was to use knowledge to change the Assyrian kingdom and the world around him, and the other was to explore the path of liberation for mortals. Faust, like crazy Ol in the past, tried to unlock the secrets of the gods and find a way to transcend life on the other side. But he used a different method from Ammon, searching in the sea of knowledge. It was too difficult for him to succeed. As the chief high priest of the kingdom, Faust did not have the same experience and luck as Ammon. Faust met Sinek, who put him in an important position, and with the guidance of the gods, he managed to turn the weak Assyrian kingdom into a powerful empire. It seemed that he had succeeded. But Goliath received a recent secret report. Faust was the staunchest opponent of Sineka's tyranny, and was even reprimanded by Sinek. Queen Samir stood on Faust's side, and the new policies that Sinek reluctantly implemented were also based on Faust's suggestions. There was another reason why Faust and Samir came to Enril. Sinek wanted to slaughter more than 2,000 innocent civilians, and Faust and Samir wanted to stop him. In the end, Sinek took the opportunity to give these people to the king and queen as slaves, and sent them to the plains of Duk to carry out a mission. With Goliath's foresight, he could already see the fate of the Assyrian Empire's decline, and Faust could probably foresee it as well. Faust had worked hard for so many years, but this was not the result he wanted. The rise of the Assyrian kingdom had already sown the seeds of decline, and it had brought a terrible disaster to countless people. A person like Faust was probably suffering greatly in his heart. Chapter 239. Samir was now a 9th-level supreme warrior, and no one knew who had taught her martial arts back then. People speculated that it was her husband. Her husband was not King Sinek, but Samir's ex-husband, a general of the kingdom. This general was stationed at the western border of Assur. At that time, there were frequent conflicts between Assur and the nomads, and Samir followed her husband into battle. As a king, Sinek had many military achievements in his early years. Once, when he led an army to defend against foreign invaders, Samir's husband was also in the army. Samir secretly put on armor and followed her husband to the battlefield. During the fierce battle, Samir's helmet was accidentally knocked off by an enemy. Her hair fluttered in the wind, and she stabbed an enemy general with her spear, causing him to fall off his horse. Sinek, who was commanding the battle, happened to see this scene. In just a glimpse, the deafening sounds of battle seemed to fade away. In his eyes, there was only this beautiful girl. Not long after the battle, Samir's husband was impeached and executed. Samir disappeared for a period of time, and when she reappeared half a year later, she had become the queen of Assur. She was only 17 years old that year. No one in the kingdom dared to talk about this publicly. Some people said in private that she was a vain woman. There were also sympathizers who defended Samir. Under the king's coercion, a young girl had no choice but to submit. But then again, which widow in the kingdom did not want to become the queen? Goliath told the results of his investigation, and finally lowered his voice. No one knows what happened between the death of Samir's ex-husband and the time she became the queen. But Faust once told me that Samir's marriage to the king may have something to do with the oracle. She must have been coerced. Now that she is a 9th-level warrior, she can make new choices that she could not before. Faust's experience was not a secret, but the legend of Queen Samir was quite shocking. Gilgamesh was about to speak, but Aman suddenly closed his eyes, as if listening to some news. After a while, Aman opened his eyes and said, "I've heard the latest news from the prayers of the people. I'm afraid this news has something to do with you." Gilgamesh shook his head and said, "I've already given up everything and am searching for the meaning of life while wandering. Is there any other news related to me?" Aman then said to Goliath, "I'm afraid this latest news will be helpful to our plan." Goliath also shook his head. "Aman, I know that you are already a god and have the means that mortals can't, so don't try to entice me. Just say it." Aman said unhurriedly, "Emperor Seneca's ego is indeed inflated to the extreme. The kingdom of Babylon has already ceded 6 cities to him, but he is still not satisfied. He actually sent an envoy to King Hammurabi II of Babylon. He wanted to marry Princess Sisela. If Princess Sisela refused, he would gather his army and attack the other 2 cities of the kingdom of Babylon. Fearing the brutality of the Assyrian army, the 2 cities are already in a state of panic. The citizens are fleeing." When Gilgamesh heard this, he stood up and shouted angrily, "He's dreaming." Aman and Goliath reached out to the table at the same time. 2 rays of light flashed and the crude wooden table was protected by the strongest divine protection in the world. Gilgamesh then slammed his palm on the table. Goliath smiled bitterly and asked, "Gil, do you still have feelings for Princess Sisela?" After a momentary outburst of anger, Gilgamesh sat back down and sighed, "Everyone knows that Princess Sisela used to be my fiancée, but that was only an arrangement made by the king. There is no love between us, not even a feeling. Now that things have come to this, it is even more impossible for us to have any relationship. Whoever Princess Sisela wants to marry is her own business. But no matter what, I don't want to see Princess Sisera and the kingdom of Babylon suffer such humiliation." Ammon and Goliath looked at each other and said in unison, "That's why Sinek must die." Princess Sisera was 25 years old. She had broken off her engagement with Gilgamesh several years ago, but she was still single. It wasn't because she liked someone, but because her identity was too sensitive. No one in the kingdom of Babylon dared to say anything about Gilgamesh. But if it was someone else, the situation would be complicated. The king of Babylon, King Hammurabi II, was old and childless. Princess Sisera was his only sister, and the rest of the princes were his nephews. The laws of the kingdom of Babylon did not prohibit women from becoming the regent or even inheriting the throne. There were even cases in history where the king of Babylon chose the most powerful nobleman to marry and inherit the throne. The queen could pass the throne to her husband, but whether it was voluntary was another matter. The fight for the king's throne depended on two factors. First, it depended on who would inherit the throne, and second, it depended on who could control the situation in the kingdom. Otherwise, even if the king inherited the throne, he or she would not be able to sit firmly on the throne. Princess Sisera was a famous beauty in the kingdom of Babylon. Ammon had seen her with his own eyes. But Sinek didn't just want a beauty, he also wanted the kingdom. The only people who were qualified to inherit the king's throne were Princess Sisera and the king's nephews. Prince Banat, with his outstanding military achievements, was considered a stronger contender for the throne than Princess Sisera. It wasn't hard to guess what Sineka's intention was. He wanted to marry Princess Sisera first, and then use the power of the Assur Empire to help Princess Sisera ascend to the throne. When that happened, he would either control the Queen of Babylon, or force her to abdicate. Instead of using military means, he would use political means to firmly control the kingdom of Babylon. Perhaps it was because of Enlil's advice, but if Sinek married the Queen of Babylon, or if he simply crowned himself with the throne, he would truly become the Assur Emperor. The kingdom of Babylon would no longer worship Marduk. It would symbolize Enlil's complete victory, and this god would reunite the realm of the Anunnaki. Gilgamesh looked at Goliath and Ammon and said something chilling, "You must have guessed Sineka's intention. The kingdom of Babylon will find it difficult to refuse his request, and Princess Sisera has no choice. In fact, the easiest way to stop Sineka's plot is to kill Princess Sisera." Ammon frowned, "Do you really think so?" Gilgamesh shook his head, "Of course not. But I've been the governor of the city for a long time, and I understand the politics and officialdom of the kingdom. There must be someone who thinks so, and perhaps will do so, whether it's for himself or for the kingdom. For example, Prince Banat's first choice is to kill Princess Sisera. Of course, he can't do it openly, but he can send an assassin to kill her." Ammon asked again, "But if he really does kill Princess Sisera, how will he explain it to the people?" Goliath interrupted, "Given the current situation in Babylon, there are bound to be warmongers and peacemakers. But as long as they are not traitors, they will not want to see Sineka's plot succeed. If Princess Sisera dies, it will most likely be declared as a suicide. The warmongers can use this as an excuse to unite the people of the kingdom against the common enemy." Ammon nodded, "So it was a suicide." Goliath smiled bitterly and nodded, "This is a reasonable speculation. It may sound sinister, but this is the part of Zhengrong that I hate the most." Ammon also smiled bitterly, "If that's the case, Sinek will definitely send someone to protect Princess Sisera. We can't let her die. He will do everything he can to stop her from committing suicide." At this point, he suddenly closed his eyes, as if listening to something. After a while, he opened his eyes and said, "One of my disciples has asked me to protect Princess Sisera in the kingdom of Babylon." While they were discussing this matter in the courtyard, Aesop, George, and the others were also discussing this news in Ammonius' palace. George, who was the high priest of the temple of Isis, also came up with a similar theory. One of the disciples could no longer sit still. He immediately prayed to Ammonius, hoping that he could protect Princess Sisera. This person was Madanzo. Back then, Madanzo and Ammon had saved Princess Sisera. Although it was a kidnapping directed by Princess Sisera herself, Princess Sisera had still rewarded him. Princess Sisela allowed Madanzo to follow her carriage back to King's City, and restored his identity as a noble warrior. But now, it didn't matter much. But Madanzo was indeed grateful to Princess Sisela. Moreover, the beautiful Princess Sisela had left a deep impression on Madanzo. He had once declared himself to be her admirer. Madanzo's idea was interesting. Since he had saved her once, he might as well save her again today. On the other hand, he didn't want Princess Sisela to fall into Seneca's hands. Therefore, Madanzo's protection had two meanings. Gilgamesh asked curiously, Seneca would send someone to protect Princess Sisela. I didn't expect that one of your disciples would also want to protect her. Who is this person? What's his plan? Aman answered, protecting and protecting are two different purposes. This person is the leader of my disciples. You've seen him on the battlefield, Madanzo. The bow in his hand is the one you used. Gilgamesh nodded, this person is not weak. If he wants to go, then send him. Galier looked at Gilgamesh with a faint smile and said, don't tell me you won't go. Gilgamesh replied as he drank, I'm no longer the governor of Uruk. I will go to the capital of Babylon, but only as a wanderer to observe in secret. As for the hero saving the damsel in distress, leave it to Madanzo. Goliath continued, if we don't talk about Princess Sisela, Seneca's actions are not a bad thing for our plan. He wants to marry Princess Sisela and make her the queen of Babylon. Therefore, Princess Sisela cannot be an ordinary concubine. But don't forget that Emperor Seneca already has a queen. What will Samir think? Will he dethrone Samir, who was born a commoner, or will he make two queens at the same time? If it's the latter, it's something that has never happened before. But Seneca should be able to do it. Aman raised his cup, no matter what Seneca does, Samir will not be satisfied. Moreover, Samir and Seneca didn't get along well, and he even scolded her. Now that she was defeated on the battlefield, it gave Seneca a good excuse to dethrone her. Compared to Samir, Seneca cared more about the kingdom of Babylon. It's natural for an emperor to think this way, but it's different for a woman. If Samir was forced to marry Seneca, and now Seneca is forcing her to marry another princess, no matter what his motive is, Samir will not be able to tolerate it. Goliath looked at Aman with a faint smile, God, do you know women very well? Aman shook his head, I don't know much about women, but I can try my best to understand them. Gilgamesh also glanced at Aman, I don't know much about women, but he should know the goddess very well. Aman changed the topic, Princess Sisela's matter is complicated. Since Madanzo wants to protect her, I'll send him. Let's talk about what happened just now, Mr. Goliath. Although you have analyzed so many possibilities, it's hard to communicate with Faust and Samir. It's easy to think about it, but difficult to do it. Goliath stroked his goatee, since I mentioned it, I naturally have a way to sit down and talk with Faust. Ammonius, I'm afraid we'll need you to appear in some way, and we'll need Ling's cooperation. Goliath suggested that Aman send an envoy to Enlil to discuss the exchange of prisoners of war. The envoy would also hand over a document, which would specify the time, place, method, and number of prisoners to be exchanged. The official document would also include some diplomatic language and praise for the gods. Galier would write the letter in the name of Aesop, the lord of Thalenberg. He and Faust had been old friends for many years, and the two of them had often exchanged letters, discussing all kinds of profound and difficult questions. Faust should be able to recognize Goliath's handwriting and the code words in the letter. Goliath would arrange a time and place for Faust to leave the city and meet him in a secret place. As for the content of the discussion, he would also explain clearly. He also promised to guarantee Faust's safety, stating that this was not a trap or a trap. If Aman promised not to take this opportunity to attack Faust, Goliath would write the letter and wait for Faust at the appointed time and place. Aman immediately agreed, promising not to take this opportunity to set up a trap for Faust. He then asked, Goliath, you and I have no ill intentions towards Faust, but can you guarantee that Faust won't take this opportunity to ambush you? Galier chuckled and said, to live in this world, one must trust and make choices. Aman, if you could trust an enemy, who would you think of first? Ammon looked at Goliath. Of course it would be you. We were once enemies. If even Goliath was not worthy of trust, then perhaps there was no one in the world who could be trusted. Crazy old trusted Goliath back then, and even let him witness the last moment of his life. Ammon also trusted Goliath, and did not hesitate to hand over the command of the withdrawal of the Legion of Steel to him on the battlefield. And how could Faust, who had been Goliath's good friend for many years, not be unaware of this? Goliath's reputation in the Hittite kingdom was comparable to that of the gods, not because of any conspiracy or struggle. Goliath said again, at the appointed time and place, even if Faust wants to ambush us, do you think the three of us will be afraid? As long as he does not mobilize a large army to encircle and annihilate us, at least self-preservation and escape will not be a problem. What he said was also very true. With the three of them together, who would they be afraid of? Gilgamesh was stunned. Do I have to go too? Goliath smiled. Since you are already here, why not help to the end? That is also another battlefield. After Ammon sees Faust, it won't be too late for you to go to the kingdom of Babylon. Gilgamesh narrowed his eyes and muttered, whether or not Faust trusts you, it is a great risk for him to come out of the city to discuss this matter. As long as he is willing to come, it means that he has a plan in mind, and your plan may succeed. I don't mind accompanying you as a bodyguard. The three of them discussed the details again, and Goliath began to write the document of exchanging prisoners of war between Leng and Enlil. On the other hand, Ammon sent down an oracle. One was to order Aesop to prepare to send an envoy to Enlil, the other was to allow Madanzo to go to the kingdom of Babylon, but he did not tell Madanzo that Gilgamesh would also go to the kingdom of Babylon. In the palace of Princess Sisela, the beautiful princess was singing a melancholy song. The beautiful legend has disappeared without a trace. I am sighing for the lost road of life. The song of joy has gone. I will bear the bullying of fate. The country and the city scattered. The wish of the past has also disappeared. The people are in pain. Even the praise makes me shocked. Those who once appreciated my voice are like duckweed drifting in this world, a long-forgotten mood. I once yearned for that solemn tranquility, but now my song is like the mournful sound on the strings, like the swaying fate. The world in front of me recedes, the past is faintly discernible. One by one, those who really knew the princess knew that she was not without ambition. She had long been secretly coveting the throne of Babylon. In the name of traveling around the kingdom, she not only investigated the situation in various places, but also cultivated her own private forces, including the establishment of the city of Marduk in the plains of Duk. In the kidnapping incident of Madanzo and Ammon, Princess Sisela even tried to involve Prince Banut in the muddy water, taking the opportunity to attack the most threatening political enemy. With the departure of her fiancé, Gilgamesh, Princess Sisela had lost her most powerful political supporter. Prince Banut, on the other hand, was fortunate enough to become the kingdom's hero and rising political star. Before the defeat of the kingdom of Babylon, King Hammurabi II had decided to pass the throne to Prince Banut after his death and make Princess Sisela the prince regent, in order to stabilize the situation in the kingdom. Chapter 240. After the death of Handian Rabi II, no one knew who would be in control of the kingdom. But Prince Banut clearly had the upper hand. If Princess Sisela was smart, she would have chosen to cooperate with him to protect herself. But the situation changed too quickly. The Assyrian army suddenly invaded and the kingdom of Babylon was routed. The 6 city-states that were ceded to the kingdom of Babylon were also under the princess's control, including her fiefdom. This was a devastating blow to the kingdom. Although Prince Banut was defeated, he managed to gain control of the kingdom's army during the process of resisting the foreign enemies. He had now become the pillar of the kingdom. But that was not the end of the disaster. Sinek arrogantly ordered the kingdom of Babylon to marry her. With the princess's intelligence, how could she not know what the ambitious emperor was up to and what kind of fate awaited her? As long as she married Sinek, the Assyrian Empire would definitely support her ascension to the throne. Once she became the queen of Babylon, she would either be completely under Sineka's control, or he would force her to hand over the throne. This time, she was really kidnapped, and in such a noble and world-famous way. so she was singing alone. But her singing was interrupted by footsteps. The supreme mage who had been following her all this while, Perry, came in without announcing his arrival. Princess Sisela turned around and asked, "What's the matter, Paley?" Perry's appearance hadn't changed much. This fair-skinned man with bright red lips still looked so coquettish. He squinted his slender and long eyes and said, "Your Highness, why is your voice so sad?" The princess looked at him. There were no tears in her eyes, not even any expression. She replied in a flat tone, "You must understand my situation." Perry smiled, which made him look even more coquettish. "My beautiful princess, of course I know what you are worried about. I don't think it's a bad thing that Emperor Sinnock wants you to marry him. You will eventually have to marry someone. Which famous hero on the continent is worthy of you? Only the invincible Emperor Sinnock. With your beauty and wisdom, you won't have to worry about not winning the heart of the Assyrian emperor. If you two get together, you will become the most illustrious monarch on the continent, the most beautiful woman and hero in history." Princess Sisela was still expressionless. "Paley, I didn't expect you to be a lobbyist." Perry shook her head. "Your Highness, I'm thinking for your sake. This concerns not only the fates of countless people, but also your own. The Prime Minister of Assyria, Alpha, has sent a secret letter, promising that as long as you marry the Assyrian Emperor, the Assyrian Empire will fully support you in ascending to the throne. From then on, there will be eternal peace, and both countries will be happy." Princess Sisela raised her voice, "Peace." Perry lowered her head and said, "Your Highness, please calm down. You and your wife will rule Assyria and Babylon like a family. This is also a way to achieve peace." Princess Sisela finally showed her anger. The people of Babylon contributed food and resources, while the Assyrians became the conquerors. Is this your so-called peace? Not to mention that brutal massacre. Perry maintained her smile. "If you marry the Assyrian emperor and become the queen of Babylon, there will naturally be no more massacres in the kingdom. Your Royal Highness, I have been following you for many years. You have long had the desire to become a queen, and now is the best time to do so. Because of this failed war, Prince Vonnegut took control of this declining kingdom. Only by relying on the strength of the Assyrian Empire can you ascend to the throne. As for what to do after that, I believe there is still a chance." The anger on Princess Sisela's face gradually faded. She asked with an expressionless face, "Are you suggesting that I feign civility with Sinnock and marry him first?" Perry nodded. "That's not a bad idea. It's the best choice for you and the kingdom." Princess Sisela waved her hand tiredly. "I understand what you mean. You may leave." Perry bowed. "Your Highness, please take care of yourself. I will be on guard nearby. If anything happens, I will be there at your beck and call." After Perry left, Princess Sisela looked at the empty house and couldn't help but wipe away the tears at the corner of her eyes. She looked so pitiful and helpless. She realized that she was being watched. Her private house had been surrounded by detection magic arrays, and the one who was watching her turned out to be Perry, the supreme mage who had been following her and looking forward to her ascension to the throne. Perry might be trying to protect her, afraid that something bad would happen to her, or there might be other reasons. She knew the methods of this supreme mage. When she planned the kidnapping case of the Highlanders, the plot to frame Prince Vonnegut was also part of Perry's plan. Sinnock's desire to control the entire Babylon kingdom was a disaster for many, but it was also an opportunity for others. A cruel king who wanted to control his great empire needed a group of nobles who understood the kingdom well to exercise his power. Perry followed Princess Sisela for this purpose, and now Sinnock could give it to him. Perry came to the front yard of the princess's house. There was another person waiting for him in the side hall. It was Cain, whom Amon had taught before. When Cain saw Perry, he stood up and asked, "What's the situation? Has Her Highness made up her mind?" Perry sighed softly. "Her Highness is still a little worried. But don't worry, I've set up a detection magic formation to keep a close eye on her. I won't give her the chance to make a wrong decision." Cain's voice trembled. "I want to remind you of another thing. Someone from Prince Vonnegut's side has proposed to assassinate Princess Sisela. The princess would rather kill herself than submit to Cynic. Perry's facial muscles twitched involuntarily. I can think of someone who might do that. Have you found out who Prince Vonnegut is going to send and when? Kane replied, Prince Vonnegut is still hesitating, but sooner or later, some of his men will lose their patience. I'll inform you as soon as I have any news and help you protect the princess. It's best if you can take the opportunity to eradicate those people. Don't forget the Assyrian Empire's promise to us. Nothing must go wrong. Perry said bitterly, those people are trying to assassinate Princess Sisela and use her death to make a fuss. But we can also use the fact that Princess Sisela is married to Emperor Cynic to promote her virtue. She is doing this for the people of Babylon. Naturally, there will be warriors who will follow the princess and protect her. We can also use the hearts of the people to our advantage. Kane added, there will be warriors from the kingdom coming to protect and escort the princess. But you must be careful not to let any assassins sneak in. Of course I know that. I've been serving the princess for many years. I know who is trustworthy. They don't think like you. They really want to protect the princess. They believe that the princess is marrying Cynic for the sake of Babylon. They don't think like you. This made Kane a little embarrassed, but he didn't want to show his dissatisfaction. After a few more words, he hurriedly left the princess's mansion. Perhaps Amon did not expect that Kane, whom he had instructed to obtain a high position in the kingdom, would be bribed by the Assyrian Empire and become Seneca's helper. The prime minister of the Assur Empire, Alpha, had once sent a messenger to promise Kane that if the Assur Empire gained complete control over the kingdom of Babylon, Kane, the high priest, would enjoy unprecedented power and status. Alpha made the same promise to Perry. Kane left Princess Sisela's mansion, crossed half of the city and entered a brothel in Babylon City. His men in disguise were already waiting at the door. He was waiting for someone in a small parlor. Not long after, one of his men reported to him that a guest had arrived. When the door opened, it was Prince Benut's confidant, Gakate, who was also Prince Benut's teacher at the Academy of Magic. When Amon and Madanzo first met Gakate in Arcade, he was only a 6th-level mage. Now, he was already an 8th-level mage. With the rise of Prince Benut's status, Gakate had also become an important figure in Babylon. This was an era of chaos. There were all kinds of conflicts and opportunities on the continent, but at the same time, it was also an era of great talents. According to a rough calculation, the number of supreme achievers in the last 10 years was more than the number in the past few decades. It was as if these hidden geniuses had found a stage to shine in this chaotic world. Kane lowered his voice as soon as he saw Gakate. Has His Highness made up his mind? Gakate sighed. Princess Sisela is innocent. There are still many warriors in the kingdom who support her. Under the pressure of the Assyrian Empire, His Majesty the King had no choice but to agree to the marriage. But His Majesty also told Prince Benut to deal with the matter himself. But His Highness still couldn't bear to get rid of this aunt who is younger than him. Kane said anxiously, how can a man of great ambition be so soft-hearted? If Princess Sisela really marries Cynic, the fate of Prince Benut and the entire kingdom will be buried in her hands. Besides, His Highness knows very well that Princess Sisela tried to frame him. Gakate sighed again, that's what I told His Highness. As far as I know, Princess Sisela tried to frame His Highness more than once. Once, she claimed that she was assassinated and tried to link the mastermind behind the assassination to His Highness. But in the end, it was His Majesty the King who suppressed the matter. Kane reminded him, His Highness might be hesitating because he doesn't want to be accused of assassinating Princess Sisela. But you and I should know how to share the burden of the kingdom. Gakate nodded, that's right. That's why I'm here to discuss this matter with you. We'll do it ourselves. When it's done, I'll ask for forgiveness from the king in private. Kane frowned, this matter must not be made public. Do you have a plan? Gakate nodded again, I've come up with a complete plan. The first step is to assassinate Princess Sisela, claiming that she killed herself in order to resist the cruel Cynic. This will ignite the anger and fighting spirit of all the factions in the kingdom. The second step is for His Highness Benut to rise to the throne and rally the hearts of the people. The third step is to persuade King Hammurabi II to abdicate so that His Highness Benut can ascend to the throne. Only then will the kingdom have a new hope. Cain nodded silently. After a while, he said, if we succeed in the first step, Prince Benut will have no choice but to act according to the plan. But first, we must make sure that nothing goes wrong in the first step. It's not easy to make a move in the capital. The best place to do it is when Princess Sisela is on her way to Assur. Inform me as soon as you're ready. Remember, don't leak anything. Gakate took his leave. Cain sat there staring at his slender fingers, deep in thought. This supreme mage was actually discussing with Peri and Gakate about protecting and assassinating Princess Sisela. It was hard to tell which side he was on. Perhaps he was weighing which side he would get the most out of. It seemed that Peri's envoy had arrived at Enril. Although the city was in a state of war, Peri had requested to exchange prisoners of war. This was also a signal. Neither side was able to start a large-scale battle at the moment. Otherwise, it would only result in a lose-lose situation. Exchanging prisoners of war was the wisest move. The document was delivered to Faust. Faust looked at it for a long time without saying anything. He agreed to the request to withdraw from Ling City and wrote a letter in reply to the messenger, confirming the time, place, number of people, and the number of concubines to be exchanged. According to past practice, exchanging prisoners of war was a signal to end the war. Enril had also responded affirmatively, indicating that this lose-lose war was over. But Faust knew very well that this was only a temporary calm. The real storm was yet to come. Emperor Sinuc, who had already occupied 6 city-states of the Kingdom of Babylon, would never be willing to accept the defeat in the plains of Duk. The small withdrawal of Leng would not stop his lofty ambitions. It was estimated that it would not be long before new orders and a large number of reinforcements arrived. The price of crossing the Saya Plateau to launch an expedition was huge, but the cruel Sinuc did not care about such a price. Sinuca's strategy was brutal, but it seemed to be very effective. He wanted to recoup the losses of the war from the enemy. The fiercer the resistance of the city, the more tragic the massacre after being conquered. The land would be occupied, the wealth would be plundered, and the people who survived would be enslaved. Faust could already see the scene of corpses strewn across the land. The narrow and winding path through the Saya Plateau and the fertile plains of Duk would be littered with bones. The document sent by Peri's envoy was personally written by Goliath. Faust recognized it at a glance and also understood the code words in the document. He knew that Goliath wanted to meet him, and he probably knew what Goliath wanted to talk to him about. Faust pondered for a few days by himself, and finally decided to take the letter to Samir. If there was one person in this world that the sage could not bear to part with, then it was this Assyrian queen. Faust did not trust Samir as much as he trusted Goliath. He did not know how Samir would view this matter, but he did not want to hide it from her. Faust frankly told Samir that Goliath wanted to meet him, and he was ready to go. Samir was silent for a long time, staring at Faust with a scrutinizing gaze, as if trying to see through this sage. Finally, he asked, "Are you not afraid that this is a trap?" Faust shook his head, "I trust Goliath. Since he has already made a promise, he will not take advantage of this opportunity to ambush me. In this world, people are not the same, and Goliath is precisely this kind of person." Samir asked again, "I can imagine what he will talk to you about, but why are you telling me? Right now in Enril, no one can restrict your movements or ask about your whereabouts." Faust had a moment of impulse to say something, but in the end, he just lowered his head and said, "Look at my heart. I cannot hide it from you. In Enril, my fate is one with yours. No matter what risky decision I make, I must tell you." Samir withdrew her scrutinizing gaze and looked out the window. Even if Goliath is trustworthy, there is no guarantee that the others in Leng will not take advantage of this opportunity to make a move. If we lose you, it will be a disaster for Enlil and even the Assyrian Empire, so I have decided to go with you." Faust hurriedly stood up and waved his hands. "No, no, no, Your Majesty, you must not take this risk. I am telling you this because I want you to know that if something unexpected happens, you can strengthen your defenses." Samir smiled faintly. "Esteemed sage, if you are not afraid of taking this risk, do you think that I am?" Faust's face turned red and shook her head. "No, no, no, I do not dare to doubt your courage. It is just that you are the Assyrian Empress, it is not worth it to do this." Samir suddenly sighed and said in a commanding tone, "Then what else in this world is worth it for me to do? Since you know that I am the Empress, then this is an order. I have decided to go with you, and only to protect your safety. I will not eavesdrop on your conversation with Goliath. You said that you do not want me to take risks, but what else in this world is more dangerous than being in the middle of a battle? I have already appeared on the battlefield, why can't I accompany you to such an appointment?" Faust took a step back and lowered her head. "That is the order of the Assyrian Emperor. I do not want to see you personally charge into the battlefield. He has an empress like you, but he does not know how to cherish you." Samir gave Faust a meaningful look and changed the topic. "The place where you will meet is in the mountains of the Euphrates Valley. That place is 200 miles away from both Leng and Enlil. It is impossible to mobilize the army deep in the mountains, and if there is any movement in Leng, it will not be able to hide from us. Even if it is an ambush by an expert, we can still escape." "It is settled then. Go back and prepare." Faust excused himself, but when he reached the door, he asked, "Your Majesty, what do you think of the latest news?" Samir asked with an expressionless face, "What news?" Faust bit the bullet and said, "His Majesty Sinek is going to marry Princess Sisela of the Kingdom of Babylon." Chapter 241. The agreed meeting time was in the morning, and in the latter half of the night, Hammer and Faust stealthily jumped off the city wall and headed east towards the mountains of the Euphrates Valley. In today's complicated situation, not only were there great men attacking and defending each other on the plains of Duk, there were also gods quietly watching this place. They did not fly, but walked quietly in the wilderness, leaving the plains and entering deep into the mountains. The Euphrates Valley was located to the east of the plains of Duk. It was not as majestic and desolate as the Saya Plateau in the north, nor was it as vast and flat as the plains in the south. The mountains were steep and filled with ravines, and the valleys were lush with vegetation. From afar, one could see towering peaks. It was difficult for ordinary people to pass through, and it was also the best place to hide one's tracks. Naturally, Goliath had set the rendezvous here for the sake of secrecy. Faust and Samir arrived at the designated place at dawn, and at a glance, they could see that Goliath had made arrangements in advance to reassure both parties. It was an independent hill, surrounded by peaks that were far away, and the view from the top was very wide. This place was both hidden and able to detect movements in the distance at any time. There was a table and 2 chairs on the top of the hill, and Goliath was already sitting there waiting. The sun had not yet risen to the top of the distant peaks, and the morning mist was drifting in the valley. Dew hung on the wet grass, and the surroundings were so quiet that only the sound of birds could be heard in the distance. Halfway up the hill, there was a man standing there casually with his arms crossed, without any weapons. In the morning mist, there was an indescribable aura about him. It was Gilgamesh, the hero who had shocked the continent a few years ago. Samir stopped halfway up the hill, and without greeting Gilgamesh, he stood at a distance, facing Gilgamesh, and watched Faust walk up to the top of the hill. Goliath knew that Faust had arrived, but he did not turn around and stand up to greet him. Instead, he filled the cup on the opposite side of his seat with wine, and then he chanted softly, "Your swaying figure is gradually approaching, the once blurry image has appeared before my eyes. Is your heart still yearning for the dream of the past? The dream rises and floats in the morning mist, the breath of youth ripples in your chest, unable to calm down, looking back at the scene of the past. Could it be that the beautiful legend has disappeared?" Faust quietly sat across from Goliath, and began to chant. Who is it that murmurs softly, the faintly discernible melody in the morning mist? Let the wine cup touch the lips, listen to the dawn's voice. Does it announce another beginning? Who can I still sing leisurely with, in this remote wilderness, under whose gaze, who is singing a song of consolation to form a new alliance? Their voices reached Gilgamesh and Samir's ears at the same time. They did not hide the content of their conversation. Faust wanted to take this opportunity to let Samir hear the conversation between him and Goliath. As for Samir's reaction, it would depend on the queen herself. Goliath raised his cup and asked Faust with a smile, "How long has it been since we last met?" Faust raised his cup in greeting, "From the last time we met until now, it has been a full 10 years. I wish you well, old man." Goliath said, "Thank you for your greeting. You are really young and promising. You broke through the 9th level before me, so I should congratulate you, sage imperial preceptor." Faust lowered his head and said, "I am ashamed. How dare I call myself promising in front of you?" Goliath asked again, "I am very happy that you can come, at least it shows that you are still willing to trust me. Although we are enemies on the battlefield, there is no barrier between us personally. Do you know what I want to talk about?" Faust replied, "Do you want to talk about the latest situation in the Assyrian Empire and the continent?" Goliath shook his head, "No, the most important thing is not these. I just want to talk about your path and your choice. I have known you for a long time. You thirsted for the knowledge of this world, hoping to solve all problems, and change the fate of the kingdom and the world around you. Under your many years of planning, the Assyrian Empire is now strong and prosperous. Should I congratulate you for getting what you want?" Faust did not answer but began to drink. He drank very slowly, his lips touching the rim of the cup as he slowly sipped. Only after finishing the full cup did he put down the cup and said, "Why do you have to laugh at me? If you have something to say, just say it." Goliath looked straight into Faust's eyes and asked, "Then answer me directly. Is this what you want to see today? Is it the world of your dreams?" Faust inadvertently glanced at Samir's ethereal figure and replied in a low but clear voice, "No, the Assyrian Empire today is not what I want to see." Goliath continued to ask unhurriedly, "Then can you tell me? What kind of Assyrian Empire do you want to see? There is no need to make assumptions about what has already happened. Let's start from the present and see if it can be done in reality. If you are willing, just say what you think in your heart." Ammon was not at the scene of the meeting between Goliath and Faust. He was a dozen miles away on a high mountain shrouded in rain clouds, watching the movements here. The vast valley was under his surveillance. On the table between Goliath and Faust was a death chaser lamp, on which Ammon had temporarily attached himself to an avatar. Like a statue of Ammon, he could hear the conversation between the two, and could even clearly sense the subtle emotional changes in the tone of the two. Goliath placed the death chaser lamp on the table without any concealment. Faust, of course, recognized this magical device and knew that it could be used as the control center of a detection magic formation. When the two were talking, they naturally had to constantly pay attention to the movements around them, but Faust did not expect that Ammon could use such a method to listen in from far away, as if he was sitting right next to him. This was a method that only a god could use. Ammon was monitoring the movements in the valley between the mountains, but he suddenly felt a little tightness on his back, as if he was also being watched. He was already a god, and his physical and mental senses were unfathomable. He could experience the slightest changes in everything in the world, so why would he suddenly have such a feeling? He did not need to turn his head to see clearly. There was indeed a person coming, stepping out of the void and appearing not far behind him. He did not sense any nervousness or hostility from this person, but the powerful aura permeated the mountain peak, imperceptibly making it difficult for Ammon to even turn around. Ammon slowly turned around without batting an eyelid to face the person, and asked in a deep voice, "Marduk?" The one who stepped out of the void was another god. Like Ammon, he had once explored and comprehended the power of origin on his own without the guidance of a divine clan, and reached the realm of transcendence and eternal life. Now, he was an existence even more powerful than Ammon, and also one of the two main gods of the Anunnaki divine clan, Marduk, who was worshipped by the kingdom of Babylon. Marduk had recently been steadily defeated by Enlil's offensive, and the kingdom of Babylon was also in a precarious situation. Looking at the current situation, in the near future, Enlil would reunite the entire Anunnaki divine realm, and Marduk's defeat was irreversible. But at this moment, seeing this god, he did not have the slightest look of a loser, and even seemed to be glowing. Marduk looked very young, with a stalwart figure that was unusually fit, and the armor he wore was engraved with exquisite floral patterns, revealing the lines of the muscles of his arms and calves that were so masculine and powerful. Ammon was already very tall, but Marduk's figure was half a head taller than Ammon, with a high nose, deep eye sockets, thick lips, and angular facial features, like a handsome warrior. Seeing Ammon turn around to speak, Marduk showed a dignified smile. "Yes, I am Marduk. Congratulations, my friend, among the blessed gods, you and I should have more in common, because we have both had the same experience. I still remember when you were fighting against the Uruk army at the Kenmit defensive line, you called out my name in public and challenged me. I admire your courage." Ammon smiled faintly. "Yes, I once said on the battlefield, invite Marduk, and then took back that sentence. Everyone has their moments of youth and frivolity, and arrogance often stems from ignorance, so the current me will not challenge you." Marduk smiled and shook his head. "Don't be nervous, I was just joking. You must be surprised that I suddenly appeared here, right?" Ammon replied frankly, "To be honest, it's not too surprising. I knew you would appear sooner or later, but I just didn't know when and where it would be. May I ask what you have come to me for?" Marduk looked at Ammon with great interest for a long time, but did not seem to see any flaws, and said with a smile, "Ammon, I'm here to offer you help. I heard that you are in a very bad situation after becoming a god." Ammon grinned. "Thank you for your kindness, but you seem to have more troubles than I do now." Marduk let out a cold snort of contempt. "My troubles? Are you trying to say Enlil?" Ammon shrugged. "Isn't that so? The kingdom of Babylon has submitted to the Assyrian Empire, and as the main god, you should be aware of what has happened recently, right? Sinek is trying to take complete control of the kingdom of Babylon, and if that is the case, you will lose your divine realm and your position as the main god. I really didn't expect you to still look so pleased with yourself." Marduk curled his lips. "So what if that's the case? Do you want me to hide in the divine realm and cry like a bullied wife? Enlil can win on earth, but he can't hurt me. If I told you that I don't care about the position of the main god of the kingdom of Babylon, would you believe it?" Ammon shook his head and said, "It doesn't matter whether I believe it or not, it's up to you whether you care or not. You didn't show up today just to talk to me about this, did you? If you want me to join the Anunnaki, I have already refused." Marduk waved his hand and said, "No, no, no. Joining the Anunnaki is not a very good choice for you, and if I were you, I wouldn't agree either. In fact, I wanted to talk to you a long time ago, but at that time you were not qualified to talk to me about any cooperation. As for today, the situation has changed." Ammon narrowed his eyes and said, "Oh, so you were also waiting for me to become a god? In that case, why did you send an oracle to stop my people from returning to their homeland?" Marduk smiled indifferently in the face of Ammon's questioning. "The gods have their own thoughts, especially a god like me. No god wants the miners of Duk to return there, unless they believe in themselves. I just made my agreement, and in fact they have gone back. Unfortunately, Ammonius, your people don't believe in you either. I don't even know what kind of dream they made up, believing in something that doesn't exist." Ammon interrupted him. "That's their own choice, it has nothing to do with you, and your oracle did not stop them from returning to their homeland after all. Today you want to talk about cooperation with me, and who do you want to deal with?" Marduk sat on a rock and waved his hand to the west. "Is there a need to ask? Of course it's Enlil. We have a common enemy, and we can sit down and have a good talk." Ammon also sat down and asked with a frown, "Didn't you just say that it doesn't matter? Why do you want me to help you deal with him?" Marduk's expression was very profound. "It's not you helping me, but we helping each other. In terms of strength, it's more me helping you. I don't care what victory Enril has won, but that doesn't mean I will forgive him, and Enril will never let you go, just like Sinnoh will never let Talon go. Instead of waiting for them to come to us, why don't we discuss how to get rid of them now? Marduk was perhaps the most optimistic person Amon had ever met. He seemed to be indifferent to the war on Earth, and even though Enril had the upper hand in the war for the divine realm, he still had an indifferent attitude. And he knew that Amon wanted to get rid of Sinnoh and support a new ruler in the Assyrian Empire, change its cruel state policy, and destroy this war chariot of militarism. Marduk came to Amon with another proposal for cooperation, to get rid of Enril. His tone was so casual, as if the name Enril was just an ordinary code name, no different from a cat or dog, and not the other main god of the Anunnaki who had already forced him to retreat. His idea could not be said to be unreasonable. No matter how much trouble Enril made on Earth, no matter what kind of victory Assyria and Hittite achieved against the kingdom of Babylon, if the god himself fell, then the desire to unify the Anunnaki would be nothing more than a futile effort. In the eyes of Amon, the same was true of Sinnoh's ambition for supremacy. But it was easier said than done to get rid of Enril. The process of this god unifying the Anunnaki divine realm was not just for the sake of vanity, but it did indeed give him greater power. What's more, Enril was astute and had the achievements of the Creator. As long as he did not make a mistake and court death himself, there was almost no possibility of him falling. Just like Marduk, although he had been forced to retreat by Enril, it was difficult for Enril to have the opportunity to kill the god himself, and the result was nothing more than another agreement. But Marduk also told Amon that according to the oath of the gods of the same divine clan, if Amon took the initiative to challenge Enril, neither Marduk nor Murin could help. But the situation was not necessarily the other way around. If it was Enril who took the initiative to challenge Amon, others could intervene to help Amon. With Enril's cunning, if he really decided to attack Amon, he would not give him a chance to find help. Fights between gods with the purpose of destroying the other side were often very tragic. Enril did not seem to have any intention of doing so at the moment. He only needed to win on Earth to force Amon and Marduk to the point where they had no place to stand, and he did not need to do anything himself. But there was one situation that Enril absolutely could not tolerate, and that was if Amon sent someone to assassinate Sinnoh, completely destroying Enril's plan to unify the divine realm of the Anunnaki divine clan. At that time, Enril would feel that leaving Amon behind was his biggest mistake, and if Amon was unfortunately alone and gave him an opportunity to take advantage of, Enril would definitely make a move. After listening to this, Amon smiled bitterly and said, "Great God Marduk, I understand what you mean. You want me to be the bait to catch the big fish Enril, but why should I take this risk to help you? As a way of solving problems between gods, what kind of agreement should we have?" Marduk's expression was full of confidence, as if he was not worried at all that Amon would refuse, and said unhurriedly, "Of course you will be willing to cooperate with me. The reason is very simple, you and Enril have a grudge, and it is impossible for you to compromise with him, and he will never let you go. Enril just wants to find out more about you first and wait for the best time to get rid of you. So you should find an opportunity to show your strength, and there is no need to hide anything, because you are no match for him. Under certain circumstances, Enril will definitely make a move as soon as possible, because he will feel that if he continues to keep you around, you will be a bigger and bigger disaster, and the threat you pose will even surpass mine." Amon asked, "Under what circumstances?" Marduk stretched out his hand and pointed to the small hill in the middle of the mountains. "That is Goliath and Faust, right? One is the chief honorary elder of the Academy of Magic, the highest priest of Hittite, and the other is the irreplaceable chief high priest of the Assyrian Empire, the sage of the nation. The reason why the domain of the source of divine power is because of the faith of the people. I think that Goliath has probably turned his back on the worship of Enril. If Faust agrees to get rid of Emperor Sinnoh and destroy Enril's plan under your persuasion, it will also mean that he has turned his back on the main god that the kingdom believes in. The leaders who are supposed to call on the people to believe in the gods on earth have turned their backs on the gods. Do you think such gods are winners or losers? That would be an extremely dangerous signal, and even if Enril nominally unified the divine realm, I am afraid it would mean that he is losing the true source of divine power. The source of all this is because of your appearance. If you were immortal, it would be fine, and it would not take long for you to die, but you are already a god who has transcended eternal life, so you must be dealt with as soon as possible. Chapter 242. Mardodon replied, "Yes, I am asking you to be the bait to lure Enril into making a move, which is a great risk for you. If you have any requests, feel free to state them." Amon thought for a moment and said, "First, you can't attack me, you can't take the opportunity to get rid of me as well, including your divine emissaries. Second, the people of Denlenburg have their own gods, and you can't force them to change their beliefs like you did before, nor can you interfere with their election." Marduk laughed. "There is no problem with the first condition, and it is perfectly normal for you to make such a request. As for the second condition, I can also promise you that even if my believers occupy the entire continent, I will not interfere with the beliefs of Denlenburg. But I want to remind you of one thing: people believe in gods not because they are born to believe, but because they can get spiritual comfort from the gods, or because they can fulfill their desires in the name of the gods. Things change, people's hearts change, and the descendants of Denlenburg will also make different choices, and when that time comes, you will probably be looking at your own statue. This is not a violation of the agreement." Amon nodded and said, "Okay, it's a deal. When everything is ready, how should I notify you?" Marduk replied, "You are also a god, and you should know that there are many shrines of Marbuks in the world that can summon me." Amon shook his head and said, "If Enril wanted to kill me, he would not have given me the chance to summon you." Marduk chuckled and reached out into the air, as if grabbing something in the void, which condensed into a blood-red stone. He handed the stone to Amon and said, "This is the blood I shed in the test to become a god. Crush it with your magic power at the right time, and I will naturally appear. Remember, when using magic power, please call my name Bushuan." Amon took the blood-red stone and was slightly startled. "Bushuan?" Marduk stood up and said with his head held high, "This is my other name. I have many names in the world, please do not reveal it to anyone." After saying that, he turned and stepped into the void. Amon shouted from behind, "I'll tell you my plan in advance, little." Then, he would crush the stone at the most appropriate time. "But you should provide another kind of assistance." "How can I get rid of Sinak?" Marduk's voice came over, "That's your business, deal with it yourself. But I can give you 2 small hints." He left confidently, but left a message imprinted into Amon's soul, saying 2 small matters. First of all, the origin of Queen Samir of Assur was actually related to the mermaid king that Amat had guided during the battle of the gods of the Anunnaki. The name of the seductress king was Siren, and he disappeared after the War of the Gods. Neither Giraffe nor Yugalu knew where he went, but Marduk and Enril found out his whereabouts later. The Mermaid King was a kind of mutated siren from the depths of the ocean, and Amon had seen Sylvia's summoned beast Rulio, who was a mermaid king and had developed intelligence and cultivated successfully. Back then, the siren of the Mermaid King came to the continent in this way, but he was luckier than Rulio, accepting the guidance of Amat and becoming a powerful divine emissary of the Ennead. In the Battle of the Gods, the siren was badly injured, and after his escape, it was finally difficult to treat, so he made a choice, to give up his body in this life and start anew with his spiritual imprint. When Batet made the choice again, he still went to be a cat, but the siren became a human, born in the northern city of the Kingdom of Assur. On Earth, a newborn baby grew up and gradually awakened the imprint of his soul. Recultivating the power of the origin in the new life was naturally much faster than that of the siren, but it did not mean that he would be able to achieve the same results. There are many experiences, trials, and opportunities in life that may never come again, and the newborn siren finally reached the end of his life. He may have overlooked one thing: the life of a human was much shorter than that of a siren. His experience and validation on the path of cultivation in the past may not be suitable for this short period of 100 years. Before he had time to pass the test of endless arising and ceasing cycle, his life would come to an end. At this time, Enril discovered his whereabouts. When the siren came to the end of his life, he made a decision: he would not be reborn with his former spiritual imprint, but would leave completely. He dispersed all of his power, including his new memories, just to do one thing before his death: to leave a certain imprint in the souls of his direct descendants, to be passed down from generation to generation until one day, someone could awaken it. The siren disappeared, but he left behind descendants, and they spread out to form a tribe in the northern part of Assur. The spiritual imprint containing the power to guide them would always be passed down in the soul of a certain tribe from generation to generation. So far, the last one was Samir. Samir was now a 9th-level supreme warrior, but Aman noticed that she could use magic. Although she did not directly use high-level magic, she used her power very well, very much like an oracle who focused on combat. Samir should have awakened the imprint in her soul and received the power to guide her, and then the imprint disappeared. Shortly after the death of her ex-husband, the imperial general, Sinek wanted to marry her. She could either marry the king or watch her people be destroyed. This was the choice Sinek gave her, and Enril told Sinek about Samir's origin in the oracle. Samir was forced to agree to marry Sinek, and there was an agreement: she could not hurt the king, and the king could not hurt her people. This was the truth about Samir's origin and her marriage to the king. Marduk told Aman another little secret about Faust. Faust, the sage of Assur, was respected by the whole country. He loved knowledge but did not get close to women, and lived a quiet life. But when he saw Samir, his soul never had peace, because he fell in love with Samir. In addition to knowledge, the sage of Assur also yearned for love, but this wish was almost impossible to realize. When Aman came back to his senses, holding the blood-red stone in his hand, the sun had already risen over the valley, and before he knew it, it was already noon. Goliath and Faust ended their conversation, and Faust stood up, bowed to Goliath, and then walked down the hill. Although Aman had been discussing things with Marduk, he also clearly knew what had happened. Goliath did not ask Faust to do anything, but only talked about Faust's wishes and Seneca's actions, pointed out the past, present, and future of the Assur Empire, and proposed a possible choice. Only by changing the king and changing its national policy could this disaster end. To put it bluntly, it was to launch a palace coup, and let Emperor Sinek die at the peak of his life. But the new king must have the support of all the forces in the country, and be able to control the priests, bureaucrats, and military groups. This person must have enough authority, and at the same time must have the desire to change the national policy. With regards to Golier's words, Faust neither agreed nor disagreed. He only silently bade farewell and left. Samir also heard all these words, but she remained expressionless and silent. When Faust walked past her, she also turned around and walked down the hill. Goliath held his wine glass and watched the backs of the two disappear into the boundless peaks. Faust silently walked on the road back to Enril, his heart suffering. Everything Goliath said was right, and that was what his desire was referring to. He did not say anything negative during the meeting, but in fact, he had already expressed his attitude. The desire in his heart had already sprouted. Samuel was walking right behind him. Faust had allowed a level 9 swordsman to be so close and defenseless. If Samuel wanted to prevent a possible coup in the future, it would be very easy for him to kill him now. But the queen did not make a move. After walking out of the mountains and into the plains, Faust suddenly heard Samir's voice: "No matter what you want to do, I will not hurt Sinek." Faust did not look back, but asked in return, "Do you still believe in that god?" "My faith is gradually drifting away from him." Samir replied, "My vow may have nothing to do with the god." Faust sighed, "Your Majesty, you can kill me. I would rather die in your hands to end this pain." Samir answered with silence. She did not make a move. The two crossed a stream in the wilderness and walked into a lush forest. Faust suddenly heard an ethereal voice: "Wise man of the world, why are you so miserable? The knowledge you seek has changed the king, and it is not what you want to see. The love you seek is right beside you, but you cannot speak. You are so sick that you do not know where your illness lies. Why do you have to endure and witness the disappointment of yourself? Tell yourself what you want, release your soul, and accept the guidance of that joy. Faust was shocked. The voice came from far away and directly imprinted into his soul. Samir, who was behind him, could not hear it. Even with Faust's means, he could not detect the source of the voice, which meant that this person's magic was superior to his. Perhaps only a god could do this. Years of cultivation had made him very calm in the face of trouble, and he did not show any abnormality on the surface. While walking, he asked in his soul, "Who are you, and which god are you?" Then a scene appeared in front of Faust's eyes, directly appearing in the world of soul meditation. A god stood on the clouds in the sky, smiled and replied, "You can call me Sudan, or Mephisto according to the language of Assyria. I am the opponent, helping you to fight against the disappointing fate." This was the manifestation of Ammonius' avatar, completely different from his usual appearance. This image was created by the artists of the world, and came from the murals and carvings of the Empire of Igut. The Empire of Igut once claimed that the name of the blasphemous demon was Sudan, and he tempted people to fight against the will of the gods. If written in the Anunnaki language, it would be Mephisto. The pharaoh of Merneptah did not announce that this person was Ammon, but the craftsmen and artists of the world created this image and depicted it in the murals of shrines and even the carvings of mausoleums. The theme was often that people got rid of the temptation of Sudan and looked up to the glory of the gods, or that the gods defeated Sudan and so on. The artists of Igut gave Sudan a dual image in their works, a perfect and handsome face, but behind him was shrouded in a layer of black mist, and in the black mist was a shadow, and in the shadow was a ferocious long horn and a pointed tail. Ammon had just accidentally learned that Marduk had another name called Paksan, and he could not help but remember that he also had another name called Allaha, and that he also had a human title, Sudan. No one knew that Sudan was Ammon, but this image was become vivid in the imagination of countless people. With just a thought, Ammon manifested this image and appeared in Faust's soul. This was not a sudden idea for no reason, and such an identity happened to be in line with what he wanted to do. Faust instinctively scolded in his soul. "Mephisto, do not shake my faith." Ammon smiled, "If that is your faith, I cannot shake it." The faith of a person has always been the master of their heart. I just want you to examine your heart. Please release your desire and tell yourself how to fulfill it. Along with these words, a piece of information was naturally imprinted into the depths of Faust's soul, precisely hitting the secret of the Supreme Mage's heart. Ammon knew Faust's desire. What he wanted was not knowledge itself, but the fruit of wisdom. What he wanted was not abstract love, but Samir who was beside him. What he wanted was not the power of magic, but the hope to be able to transcend the suffering of life. This information was like a blazing brand into the soul, and Faust could not help but tremble. Samir, who was behind him, asked, "What's wrong, sage?" Faust hurriedly replied, "Nothing, I just feel pain, the pain of making a choice." Ammon spoke again in his soul, "Faust, if you make a choice and let me help you fulfill your wish, we can make a deal." Faust asked in a half-moan, "What deal?" Ammon had not thought of making any exchange with Faust, but at this moment he felt that this might be another option to test the soul of the human world, so he slowly replied, "Your desire is the master of your heart, and the power that I guide is its servant. When the day comes when it is fulfilled, please offer your soul." Faust asked in reply, "But how can you get it?" "That is the illusory of many friends." Ammon smiled, "The gods have their own means. When the servant becomes the master, you will understand. If you agree, I can tell you an answer right now, and that is to become the source of the power of the gods. And Queen Samir who is beside you actually knows this secret. The answer that you have been searching for in the sea of knowledge has long existed in a place that you cannot see." Faust asked again, "You seem to be able to see through the soul of a person, please tell me, does Samir love me?" Ammon smiled again, "Your desire is the master of faith, and my power is only its servant. So you should ask yourself, will Samir love you? If Cynic is still here, you will never get her. Goliath has already told you what to do, isn't that what you want? Samir was walking when she suddenly saw Faust turn around and say to her, "Your Majesty, if His Majesty Sinek wants to marry Princess Sisela and set up another queen, the Empire's chief high priest must preside over the ceremony and clearly point out your mistakes." Samir replied with an expressionless face, "With Sineka's madness, he can easily set up 2 queens and change the laws of the Empire. But the ceremony indeed needs you to preside over. You should soon receive the order for you to go. Faust, I'm asking you to go with me. This is both a request and an order. Although I have never exercised this authority, as the chief high priest of the Empire, I have the right to request His Majesty to have another queen present during the ceremony, regardless of whether His Majesty intends to depose you or not." Recently, the most important event in the Kingdom of Babylon was the marriage of Princess Sisela. The marriage of a princess to another king was usually a symbol of an alliance between the 2 kingdoms. It was a very common political marriage. For example, the former pharaoh Lazith II of Igut once married the daughter of the former king of Hittite, Lucier. At that time, the 2 kingdoms signed a peace treaty after a great war. But now, the situation was clear to everyone. Princess Sisela's marriage to Sinek meant that the Kingdom of Babylon submitted to the Assur Empire. This meant that the 2 kingdoms had acknowledged the current alliance, but it also meant that they were being controlled by someone else. In any case, the weakened Babylon kingdom needed a breather. Many hoped that the beautiful and wise Princess Sisela could bring peace and a turning point to the kingdom. Although the Kingdom of Babylon had just been defeated, the dowry of Princess Sisela was still extravagant. Dozens of luxurious carriages were filled with them. The place where Emperor Sinek married the princess was in the former Kingdom of Babylon, which had now become the new territory of Assur. Lis was a rich and prosperous city. It was the last of the 6 cities that fell to the Assur Empire. At that time, under Faust's suggestion, the Assur Empire's new policies had been implemented. Thus, the damage to the city was relatively minor, and the prosperity of the past was mostly preserved. After Sinek took over Lis, he moved all the natives to different places. He also moved a large number of people from other occupied areas to settle in Lis. They were given land to serve the kingdom and to pay taxes. Lis was located on the east bank of the Lis River. The Lis River and the lower reaches of the Euphrates River converged, forming a vast plain. Babylon was the birthplace of an ancient civilization. After Sinek took over Lis, his military expansion had reached its limit. The Assur army had to manage the vast occupied areas, and the destroyed areas had yet to be restored. So the emperor decided to temporarily halt his army. Chapter 243. Sinek ordered the construction of 2 buildings in the city. One was the Shrine of Enlil, and the other was the emperor's palace. He wanted this city to be his second capital in the new territory. In the mind of this great emperor, in addition to the original capital of Assyria, Nineveh, he wanted to build 2 auxiliary capitals, the other one to be in the plains of Duk, and he had even thought of the location, which was where the city of Talang is today. The Shrine of Enlil was easy to build. The original Marduk shrine in the city would be remodeled. The main building would remain, and the main statue would be replaced with Enlil's. However, it was a little troublesome to transform the original mansion into a palace. Sinek thought that the mansion was too shabby and ordered the nearby buildings to be demolished and rebuilt. What he wanted was a grand and luxurious palace. The Assyrian Empire mobilized a large number of newly conquered slaves to build Sineka's palace. The deadline was very tight. Many craftsmen and slaves died of exhaustion in the quarries, and many were cruelly punished for failing to complete the task. The palace was still under construction, but the main hall and Sineka's residence had already been completed. Sinek planned to marry Princess Sisela here, and the princess would also live in the palace after the wedding. Sinek sent a procession to Babylon to escort the princess, both to escort the princess and to ensure her safety. At some point, there was a rumor that someone wanted to assassinate Princess Sisela. The assassin might be a fanatic from the Assyrian military, and they wanted to stop Sinek from marrying the princess and ending the war. This rumor was very interesting. It was possible that some extremists in the Assyrian military had the idea, but it was the main forces of the Babylon kingdom who wanted to assassinate Princess Sisera. Since there was such a rumor, the Assyrian Empire naturally had to escort the princess safely to Lis. The Babylon kingdom also sent a team of guards, and some warriors who worshipped the princess also followed behind the procession. The procession was rather complicated. In front of the procession was the Assur kingdom's guard of honor. In the middle of the procession were the Babylon kingdom's guards, who were escorting the princess's carriage. Behind the long procession were warriors who were equipped with their own weapons and rations. After leaving Babylon city, they would travel along the west bank of the Lizi River to reach Sennacherib's palace. It would take them more than half a month to travel, and they would have to camp in many towns along the way. Although everyone had raised their vigilance to guard against the appearance of assassins, the journey out of Babylon city was peaceful. Nothing out of the ordinary happened. On the contrary, many people spontaneously greeted the princess by the roadside. Some were crying, some were singing poems, and some were representing the nobles of the towns to pay their respects to the princess and present gifts. The princess did not receive any guests. All the gifts were received by the supreme mage Peri, who accompanied her and conveyed her gratitude. On the third day, there was finally a small problem. People almost thought that it was an assassin, but it turned out to be a misunderstanding. That morning, not long after the princess's entourage left the town where they had set up camp, they passed through a stretch of lush green fields. The official road in front of them took a turn, and on the left there was a small hill. There were not many trees on the hill, and it was a grassy slope that was knee-high. Halfway down the mountain, a man shouted from the top of the mountain, "Princess Sisera, I'm here to protect you." The man's voice traveled far and wide, and the entire entourage heard him. His voice caused a commotion. The guards and warriors in the front and back turned around, their bows nocked and their swords unsheathed. Peri, with his staff in hand, jumped onto the roof of the princess's carriage. The well-trained Assyrian warriors at the front had already turned their horses around and rushed to the foot of the hill, raising their heavy crossbows. There was only one person at the top of the mountain. He was wearing the most dazzling warrior armor on the continent. It was made of damask steel and covered with heavy silver. It was also engraved with the patterns of divine spells. This man did not carry a sword. Instead, he had a curved, thong-like scimitar hanging from his waist. The hilt of the scimitar was tied with a silk ribbon, and the hilt was long like a short staff with a flame sprite embedded in the end. Amidst the tense atmosphere, he walked down the hill in big strides with a smile on his face and a spirited look on his face. Crips, the leader of the escort team sent by the Assyrian Empire, had already surrounded the foot of the mountain with his cavalry. "Halt," he shouted, "do not trespass on the princess's carriage or you will be killed." As if he didn't hear him, Madanzo waved at Peri from afar. "Peri, we meet again." "I'm Madanzo, do you still remember me?" "Oh, I heard you're already a supreme mage, at least the 8th level, right?" Those who didn't know his background wouldn't know how close he was to Peri. Madanzo didn't slow down as he spoke. He strode forward in big strides, already within the range of the crossbows. Peri frowned and was about to shout, but the sound of bowstrings rang out. The knights of the escort team had released their arrows in unison. They only listened to their captain's orders. Crips had already ordered Madanzo to stop, but Madanzo didn't. These people were used to killing on the battlefield, and as soon as they saw Madanzo walk into their range, they shot their arrows without hesitation. The arrows shot by the strong warriors were powerful enough to pierce through a bull. In the blink of an eye, they would turn Madanzo into a hedgehog. Many people at the back of the caravan cried out in alarm. However, Metatro didn't even draw his saber. He didn't dodge or block. He didn't even stop moving. With a wave of his hand, he left a series of afterimages in the air. It was as if his arm had turned into countless arms and caught all the crossbow bolts in his hand. He held a handful of them in his hand. Although the distance was a little far, an ordinary person's skin and flesh would have been rubbed off if he had caught the arrow. It was not easy to catch it, but Metatro had caught it as easily as if it was a stalk of grass. After exclaiming in surprise, everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. Cripps had already unsheathed his sword, and his knights had raised their spears and were ready to charge. They knew that they had encountered a powerful opponent. At this moment, they heard a delicate shout, "Stop! This warrior is my friend. He's here to protect me. Didn't you hear him?" Everyone looked up and saw that Princess Sisela had already lifted the curtain and was standing in front of the carriage shaft. Her silhouette was delicate and her hair was fluttering gently in the morning breeze. However, her pretty face was cold and her voice carried an irresistible majesty. "Did you hear that?" Metatro shouted again in a high-spirited manner. "Her Highness has summoned me. Put down your weapons." As he spoke, he walked towards the caravan at the foot of the mountain. Cripps rode up to Princess Sisela and said in a displeased tone, "Your Highness, this man is skilled and we don't know why he's here." "You can't act on your own." Princess Sisela retorted, "What do you mean? Do you have the final say? He's a warrior that I personally conferred to the kingdom. When I was kidnapped by the giants on the Saya Plateau, it was he who risked his life to save me and escort me back to the capital. Of course you don't know him, but he's my friend. Perry can testify for me." Perry, who had jumped off the carriage, explained awkwardly, "Yes, his name is Medanzo. He did rescue and protect your Highness, so your Highness conferred him the title of a noble warrior." "But," Princess Sisela interrupted with a sullen face, "but what? He's my savior, a noble knight. What's wrong with escorting me?" Cripps grumbled in his heart. Of course, there were many heroes of the kingdom who worshipped and followed Princess Sisela. There were dozens of them following behind the caravan, but they were not part of the royal guards and could not disturb the princess's carriage. They could only bring their own rations with them. Who would have thought that Medanzo would come and greet the princess so openly? Cripps straightened his neck and shouted, "I've been ordered by Emperor Cynic to protect your Highness. I'll be in charge of all the security along the way. Do not let this dangerous and unknown man get close to your carriage." Princess Sisela was furious. She didn't give him any face and snapped, "Cripps, are you trying to commit treason? It's not up to you to say whether this man is trustworthy or not. Only I have the final say. There's no way you don't know who I am, and why I'm going to Assur. If he isn't trustworthy, then there's no one here, including you, who is. I won't stop you from carrying out the orders of the Emperor, but please consider your identity and future. Guards, disperse. Summon the hero." Cripps was choked for a moment. His face turned red, and he almost couldn't speak. He was one of the leaders of Seneca's palace guards and a supreme warrior. He was sent here on a mission to escort the princess to Assur. Originally, he despised the people of Babylon Kingdom. Just now, he was ready to kill Medanzo if he wanted to. But Princess Sisela's words were like a bucket of cold water poured over his head. It was a warning that made his skin crawl. The princess was going to marry the Emperor of Assur and become the Empress of the Assur Empire. No matter what her motives were, once she became the Empress, even if she only won Seneca's favor, it wouldn't be difficult for her to find an opportunity to get rid of him, the leader of the palace guards. If Princess Sisela wanted to kill someone with a borrowed knife to vent her anger, would Emperor Cynic protect the queen or the captain of the royal guards? Princess Sisela's words were clearly hinting, "Don't talk back to me. Don't be fooled by your prestige now. When I become the Empress of Assur, I'll be able to take care of you." Cripps's mind raced as he realized that the princess in front of him wasn't someone to be trifled with. So he bowed and said, "Your Highness, I'm only doing this out of consideration for your safety. Since you have absolute trust in him, then let him come." He then waved his hand and ordered his knights to clear a path. Medanzo walked to the front of the carriage and bowed to the princess, "My beautiful princess, do you still remember what you said back then? When I escorted you from the town of Arcade to the capital of Babylon, you said that on the day of your marriage, you would let us brave men accompany you. I've always remembered it. That's why I came here today." Princess Sisela did say these words, but she was joking with her guards. Someone asked her when she was going to marry Gilgamesh. Princess Sisela didn't answer directly, so she said those words. Today, she was indeed going to get married, but to Emperor Sinek. Princess Sisela looked at Madanzo, and for some reason, her heart was filled with emotions. She wanted to show a noble smile, but it was very faint. She waved her hand gracefully and said, "Thank you, my noble hero." Then she turned to Perry and said in a commanding tone, "Give this hero the best horse you have. Tell him to follow my carriage." Perry was stunned. He wanted to dissuade her but didn't say anything. The Supreme Mage suddenly realized that the woman in front of him, be it the Princess of Babylon or the Empress of Assur, was not someone to be trifled with. He even regretted accepting the bribe of the Assur Empire. He had been spying on the princess for so many days, and it might be a thankless task to do so. No matter how much pressure the princess was under, the only one who could truly offend her was Emperor Sinek himself. Everyone else had better learn their lesson. So Madanzo rode a pure white horse next to the princess's carriage. In front of him was a dazzling ceremonial guard, and behind him was a luxurious caravan. He was the most eye-catching person in the entire procession. He took out a fiery red cloak out of nowhere and put it over his bright silver armor. Only those in the know would know that he was a brave warrior who had volunteered to protect the princess. But those who didn't know the truth would think that he was the groom who had come to pick up the bride. Princess Sisela was talking to Madanzo through the curtain in the carriage. She said in a low voice, "I heard that you followed Supreme General Amon to Salem." "No, I should call you Ammonius now. It is said that Supreme General Igut was actually a god who walked among the mortals. Is that true?" Madanzo raised his head and answered, "Yes. He is a true god, my only god." For some reason, the princess sighed and said, "You shouldn't have come here. Salem has just fought against the Assyrian Empire in the plains of Duk. If they knew who you are, they would have treated you as a dangerous enemy." Princess Sisela naturally knew who Madanzo was, and so did Perry, the supreme mage who accompanied her. Perry wanted to remind her but was stopped by the princess. Crips, the supreme warrior sent by Sinek, had been living in the capital of Assyria for a long time. He had been in charge of the Assyrian imperial army for a long time, so he didn't know much about the news from afar. Madanzo was only the captain of Supreme General Amon's bodyguard. Even after he came to Salem, he only showed up a few times in the war. It was normal that Crips had not heard of him. Madanzo smiled and said, "This is the territory of the Kingdom of Babylon. I used to be a noble warrior of the Kingdom of Babylon. Why can't I come with you? In order to protect you, I am not afraid of any danger. I will escort you all the way to the Lys River. You will be safe after crossing the river." Madanzo wasn't stupid. He wouldn't cross the river with the convoy into a city guarded by the Assyrian army. He would only escort the princess to a safe place. The princess nodded silently. She couldn't help but ask in a concerned tone, "Before I left Babylon City, I heard the latest news. He was also in the battle against the giant legion. Is he all right?" Madanzo was a little surprised. He immediately understood that the princess was talking about was Gilgamesh. He couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. But he still replied politely, "He's fine. He's not as arrogant as he used to be. I wouldn't have noticed him if he hadn't shown up. He actually appeared in the battle as an ordinary archer." The princess was a little surprised. "Oh. How did he dress up? I can't imagine him like that." Madanzo had no choice but to describe the scene of Gilgamesh's appearance on the battlefield. The princess couldn't help covering her mouth as she listened to the shocking battle. Finally, she put her hand on her chest and asked, "Where did he go after the battle? How did he react when he heard the latest news from the Kingdom of Babylon?" There was a hidden meaning in the princess' words. What she really wanted to ask was, how did Gilgamesh react when he heard that Sinek was going to force her to marry him? What did he say? But it wasn't a good time to ask directly. Madanzo sighed and answered, "Unfortunately, I don't know either." I rushed here as soon as I heard the news. I wasn't with Gilgamesh at the time. Then both of them fell silent. The princess looked at the hazy scenery outside the carriage through the gauze curtain, sighing for someone. Madanzo's appearance had evoked her memories of the past. At this moment, the person she missed the most was her ex-fiancé, Gilgamesh, who had never cared about her. Where was Gilgamesh at this moment? Princess Sisela would never have imagined that the once noble hero was now wearing a shabby linen robe and a pair of worn boots, rushing to the kingdom of Babylon. After entering the city, he went straight to Prince Banut's mansion. When he walked towards the gate, a guard at the gate immediately stopped him. Gilgamesh didn't move. He stood on the stone steps and said, "Please inform the guard that I want to see Prince Banut." "My name is Gilgamesh." The bodyguard had already raised his leg to make a faint kick and was about to glare at Gilgamesh when he heard Gilgamesh's last sentence. He froze in place and rubbed his eyes in disbelief. Putting down his leg, he stretched out his head and asked, Are you really Gilgamesh?" Gilgamesh answered calmly, "What good would it do me to pretend to be Gilgamesh in this place?" "That's right. Someone pretending to be Gilgamesh in front of Prince Banut's mansion is no different from seeking death." The guard went in to inform the guard of Gilgamesh's arrival. After a while, the gate opened and Prince Banut came out to greet Gilgamesh. He bowed from afar. "Gilgamesh, is it really you?" "My apologies, my servants have been rude." Gilgamesh shook his head, "They have not been rude. Thank you for coming out to greet me personally. I have an important matter to discuss with you. I wonder if Your Highness has the time. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.